After 50 years on the bench as a high court judge, I thought I had seen every form of human betrayal. I was wrong. At my own retirement dinner, surrounded by crystal glasses and forced smiles, I watched my nephew Terrence slip a small white pill into my vintage Merlot. He thought I was distracted by the applause. He thought I was just a tired old man ready to be put out to pasture. I did not scream. I did not call the police. I simply dropped my fork, spun the lazy Susan, and watched him drink his own poison. 5 minutes later, he was on the floor, and I was just getting started. Before I tell you how I destroyed them all, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe justice is a dish best served cold. The air in the private dining room of Le Chateau in Atlanta was thick enough to choke on. It smelled of expensive perfume, roasted duck, and desperation. I stood near the mahogany sidebar, gripping my cane, not because I needed it, but because it made me look frail. That was the image they wanted. Eldridge Turner, the retired high court judge, finally losing his grip. I watched Terrence across the room. My nephew. The boy I had raised since his parents died in that wreck on I-85 20 years ago. He was wearing a $3,000 suit I knew he could not afford, sweating through his silk shirt despite the aggressive air conditioning. His eyes were darting around like a trapped rat. He was not looking at me with love. He was looking at me like a winning lottery ticket he could not wait to cash. Beside him was Sarah, my son Tyrell's wife. She was the one pulling the strings. I could see it in the way she nudged Tyrell, the way she whispered in Terrence's ear with a serpentine grace. She was smiling at the guests, but her eyes were cold, calculating the value of the silverware. Sarah had never liked me. She tolerated me because I was the golden goose. She was 30 years old, sharp, manipulative, and she looked at my family not as people but as assets to be liquidated. And then there was my son Tyrell, my poor, weak Tyrell. At 34, he was still trying to find himself as an artist, living entirely off the allowance I provided, completely under Sarah's thumb. He sat there staring at his phone, oblivious to the fact that his wife and his cousin were plotting his father's murder right in front of him. I moved to the table. The music was soft jazz, the kind viola my late wife used to love. Every time I heard it, I felt a pang of loss so sharp it almost brought me to my knees. Viola was the only one who had ever truly known me. She was the steel in my spine. When she died 5 years ago, she made me promise to look after the boys. I had failed. I had let them become monsters. But tonight, I was going to fix it. I sat at the head of the round table. The centerpiece was a massive arrangement of white lilies, funerary flowers. I wondered whose idea that was. Probably Sarah's. A subtle joke only she understood. The waiter poured the wine, a 1990 Merlot from my private cellar. It was deep red, almost black in the dim light. I saw Terrence approach my seat. He held his hand over my goblet, pretending to adjust the napkin. It was a move I had seen 100 times in surveillance videos during my years on the bench. Sleight of hand. A small white pill dropped from his cuff into the deep red liquid. It dissolved instantly. No bubbles, no residue. Professional grade. Probably a concentrated heart stimulant meant to induce a stroke or a massive cardiac event. It would look natural for a man of 68. He stepped back, a smirk playing on his lips. I kept my face impassive. I had presided over 50 murder trials involving poisoning. I knew the signs. I knew the methods. And I knew exactly what that pill would do. I looked at the wine. Then I looked at Terrence, who had taken the seat directly to my right. The lazy Susan in the center of the table was laden with appetizers. I knew I had seconds. I let out a sharp gasp. "Oh, my hand," I cried out, gripping my left wrist as if seized by a sudden cramp. I let my heavy silver fork clatter loudly onto the fine china plate. It was a sharp, jarring sound that made everyone jump. Sarah gasped, her eyes flashing with annoyance. Tyrell looked up from his phone, startled. Terrence instinctively leaned down to check the floor for the fork. In that split second of distraction, while every eye was turned downward or away, I did not hesitate. I reached out with my right hand and gave the glass lazy Susan a firm, calculated spin. The heavy glass disc rotated smoothly on its bearings. My poisoned goblet slid to the right, stopping perfectly in front of Terrence. His identical, untouched goblet slid in front of me. It was geometry. It was physics. It was justice. By the time Terrence sat up holding the fork he had retrieved from the floor, the swap was complete. The glasses looked exactly the same. The wine was the same level. The lighting hid everything. "Are you okay, Uncle Eldridge?" he asked, his voice dripping with fake concern. "Just a cramp," I muttered, massaging my hand. "Old age. It catches up with us all eventually." He smiled. It was the smile of a predator who thought the trap was sprung. He placed the fork down and adjusted his jacket. He did not notice the glasses had moved. Why would he? He was too focused on the outcome. He stood up, tapping his glass with a spoon. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at the young, charismatic director of the Turner Family Charity Foundation. "Family friends," he began, his voice booming with practiced charisma. "Tonight, we honor a giant, my Uncle Eldridge Turner. A man who has dedicated 50 years to the law. A man who has defined justice for this state." He looked down at me. "To your rest, Uncle. May it be long and peaceful." The double meaning was so loud it was deafening. Sarah raised her glass, her eyes locking with mine. There was a challenge in them. She thought she had won. She thought this was the end of the road for the old man. I raised my goblet. The clean one. "To the future," I said, my voice steady, "and to reaping what we sow." Terrence laughed. He thought I was being sentimental. He raised the poisoned chalice to his lips. I watched his throat work as he swallowed the wine, every drop. I took a sip of mine. It tasted like victory. I set my glass down and waited. I checked my watch discreetly. The pill he used, if my suspicion was correct, was likely a compound called digitoxin or something similar. Fast-acting in high doses. 1 minute passed. Terrence remained standing, launching into a speech about the future of the Charity Foundation. He talked about expanding into international markets, about moving funds offshore for tax efficiency. I knew what that meant. He was talking about laundering money. He was talking about gutting the legacy Viola and I had built to pay off his gambling debts. I sat there nodding, playing the part of the proud uncle, while inside I was counting the seconds. 2 minutes. He was sweating more now. He reached up and loosened his tie. He cleared his throat. It must have felt dry. The first sign. His heart rate would be climbing rapidly now, pounding against his ribs like a hammer. He took a sip of water. It wouldn't help. The poison was already in his bloodstream, racing toward his heart. 3 minutes. He started slurring his words. He said legacy, but it came out as legacia. He blinked rapidly as if his vision was blurring. Sarah frowned. She was sharp. She sensed something was wrong. She looked at me, then at Terrence. I saw the realization flicker in her eyes, the sudden dawn of horror. She looked at my glass, then at his. She knew, but she couldn't say anything. Not without admitting what they had done. 4 minutes. Terrence paused mid-sentence. He looked confused. He touched his chest, his hand clawing at his silk shirt. He stammered. "I feel strange." The room went quiet. People thought he was overcome with emotion, but I knew better. I saw the panic in his eyes. He looked at me pleading. "Uncle, 5 minutes." His eyes rolled back into his head. It was classic. The arrhythmia hitting the heart muscle, shutting down the pump. He grabbed the tablecloth, his fingers hooking into the fabric. He pulled Crystal and China down with him as he crashed to the floor. The sound was tremendous, a symphony of breaking glass. Foam gathered at the corners of his mouth. His body convulsed violently, his heels drumming a chaotic rhythm on the hardwood floor. The room erupted in screams. Guests scrambled back, knocking over chairs. Tyrell jumped up, shouting his cousin's name. Sarah was on her feet, shrieking, but her eyes were not on Terrence. They were on me. Pure, unadulterated hatred. I remained seated for a moment, calmly setting my napkin on the table. I looked at the chaos I had engineered. I felt no guilt, only a cold, hard resolve. They had tried to kill me in my own house at my own table. They had broken the most sacred law of nature. I stood up slowly, leaning on my cane. I did not rush to help him. I knew there was nothing to be done. Instead, I walked toward the body, my face a mask of shock and grief. Sarah rushed past me, falling to her knees beside Terrence. She looked up at me, her face twisted. "You," she hissed low enough that only I could hear. "You did this." I looked down at her. "I did nothing." "Sarah," I said, my voice ice cold. "I simply let nature take its course." Tyrell was shaking Terrence, trying to get a response. "Call 911, he screamed. "Someone call 911. Guests were fumbling for their phones. I reached into my pocket. but I wasn't reaching for my phone to call for help. I was reaching for my old handkerchief. I bent down, pretending to comfort Tyrell, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Son, let me help," I said. In the confusion with Sarah distracted by checking Terrence's pulse and Tyrell sobbing, I reached into Terrence's jacket pocket. I felt the hard rectangle of his smartphone. With a practiced motion, smooth and unseen, I slid his phone out and replaced it with an old burner phone I had bought days ago. It was the same make and model. I slipped his real phone into my own pocket. This was the key. The poison was just defense. The phone was the weapon. I knew everything was on there. The bank transfers, the messages with Sarah, the gambling debts. It was the black box of their conspiracy. The sirens were audible in the distance now. I stood up, patting my pocket. Terrence had stopped convulsing. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow and ragged. He wasn't dead, not yet. But his life as he knew it was over. And mine, my real life. The fight for my legacy was just beginning. The scream that tore through the dining room was not one of grief, but of accusation. Sarah did not rush to check for a pulse on the man she claimed was her favorite cousin-in-law. She did not loosen his tie or call for a doctor. Instead, she lunged across the space between us with the ferocity of a cornered animal, her finger tipped with a sharp blood-red nail pointed directly at my chest. "What did you do to him?" she shrieked. Her voice was pitched perfectly to carry over the commotion, ensuring every senator partner and family friend in that room heard her. "You killed him. I saw you looking at his glass. What did you put in it?" It was a masterclass in deflection. She knew exactly what was in that glass because she was the one who had likely sourced the pill. Now that her plan had catastrophically backfired, she was improvising, trying to convict me in the court of public opinion before the police even arrived. I stood my ground, leaning heavily on my cane, feigning the confusion of a shock-addled old man. "Sarah, be reasonable," I said, keeping my voice low and trembling just enough to sound frail. "I have been sitting here the whole time." She turned to the crowd, her eyes wide and manic. "He has been threatening Terrence for weeks." She lied, spinning a narrative out of thin air. "He is jealous. He is senile and dangerous. Someone hold him. Don't let him leave." My son Tyrell stood frozen near the centerpiece. He looked from his wife to his father, his face a mask of pathetic indecision. He should have been defending me. He should have been taking charge. Instead, he was a statue paralyzed by the force of Sarah's personality. "Do something, Tyrell," she barked at him. "Your father just murdered your cousin." Tyrell blinked, looking at me with wet, fearful eyes. "Dad," he stammered. "Dad, what is happening?" I looked at my son and felt a wave of exhaustion that had nothing to do with age. He was 34 years old, yet he stood there waiting for permission to breathe. I did not answer him. I could not afford to engage in a debate while the evidence I needed was still in Terrence's pocket. The room was swirling into chaos. Waiters were dropping napkins to rush over. A doctor from the university hospital, a guest of mine, was pushing through the crowd. This was my window. I dropped my cane. It clattered loudly on the floor, a calculated distraction. I fell to my knees beside Terrence, letting out a cry of dismay that sounded like heartbreak, but was actually purely tactical. "My boy!" I shouted, throwing my body over his torso as if to shield him. "Give him air," I commanded, waving my arm to force the gathering crowd back. "Step back. Everyone step back." The doctor was seconds away. Sarah was circling like a shark, trying to get a view of what I was doing. I had to be fast. I had presided over 3,000 criminal cases in my career. I had watched hours of surveillance footage showing pickpockets and evidence tamperers. I knew that the hand is quicker than the eye, especially when the eye is distracted by tragedy. I placed my left hand on Terrence's chest, feigning a clumsy attempt to check his heart. My right hand slipped under his silk jacket. I felt the weight of his smartphone in the inner pocket. I knew Sarah and Terrence used an encrypted messaging app. I knew they thought they were clever, but they were arrogant, and arrogance makes you sloppy. I had purchased a burner phone 3 days ago, an identical model to the one Terrence insisted on flaunting. It was in my sleeve, weighing down my cuff. With a motion as fluid as pouring water, I slid the burner phone into his pocket and withdrew his actual device. In one breath, the swap was done. I slid his phone into the deep side pocket of my own jacket just as the doctor dropped to his knees beside me. "Move aside, Eldridge," the doctor said, his voice urgent. I slumped back, panting, acting as though the physical exertion had nearly finished me. I watched Sarah. She was staring at Terrence's jacket. She suspected. I could see the gears turning in her mind. She knew there was incriminating evidence on that phone. She took a step forward, her hand reaching out. "I need his things," she said, her voice tight. "I need to call his doctor." I grabbed her wrist. My grip was not the grip of a frail old man, it was iron. "Do not touch him," I snarled, dropping the facade for a microsecond. "This is a crime scene now, Sarah. Tampering with the body is a felony." She recoiled, her eyes flashing with hatred. She pulled her arm free, rubbing her wrist. "You are going to rot in prison for this old man," she hissed. The sirens wailed outside, cutting through the din of the dining room. The paramedics burst in a flurry of high-vis jackets and medical equipment. They pushed us all back. I watched them work on Terrence. They cut open his shirt. They were shouting numbers and vitals. He was in bad shape. The poison was a heavy dose. I felt a flicker of cold satisfaction. He had meant that dosage for me. He had meant to stop my heart. If he died, it was suicide by stupidity. "We need to transport him now," the lead paramedic shouted. They loaded him onto the stretcher. The wheels squeaked on the polished floor. Sarah immediately moved to follow them. "I am going with him," she announced, trying to climb into the back of the ambulance as they rolled him out to the curb. She was desperate. She needed to get that phone before the police did. She needed to control the narrative at the hospital. I stepped in front of her. The flashing red lights of the ambulance painted us in a hellish strobe. "No, you are not," I said, my voice booming with the authority I had used to silence courtrooms for decades. "You are not his next of kin. You are his cousin-in-law. I am his legal guardian." I raised the papers I had kept in my breast pocket, a power of attorney document Terrence had signed years ago when he needed me to bail him out of a gambling debt. It was old, but it was valid. The paramedic looked at the papers, then at Sarah's manic expression, and finally at me. "The judge goes," the paramedic said, pointing to me. "Ma'am, you need to step back or I will call the police to remove you." Sarah froze. She looked at Tyrell, who was hovering uselessly by the restaurant doors. "Do something," she screamed at him. "Stop him." But Tyrell did nothing. He just watched, his face pale and wet with tears. I climbed into the back of the ambulance. The doors slammed shut, sealing Sarah out. The silence was sudden and heavy, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor and the ragged gasps of the man who had tried to kill me. The ambulance lurched forward, sirens screaming. I sat on the bench seat watching the paramedic adjust an IV line. He was focused on the patient. He was not watching me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Terrence's phone. It was still warm from his body. I looked at his face. His eyes were closed, his skin gray and clammy. I needed his thumb. I reached out, taking his limp hand in mine. The paramedic glanced up. "I am just holding his hand," I said softly, praying. The paramedic nodded sympathetically and turned back to the monitor. I pressed Terrence's thumb against the sensor. The screen unlocked instantly. My heart hammered against my ribs louder than the siren. I tapped the messaging icon. There it was, pinned at the top. A contact saved simply as the boss. It was Sarah. I opened the chat. The last message had been sent 6 minutes ago, just before the chaos erupted. It was short. It was brutal. It was the smoking gun I had been waiting for. "Is the old man dead yet?" the message read. I stared at the glowing screen. The timestamp was damning. She had sent it while raising her glass to toast me. I scrolled up. There were weeks of messages, plans, dosages, bank account numbers in the Cayman Islands, jokes about how they would redecorate my house once I was in the ground. It was all there, every ounce of their treachery digitally preserved. I looked down at Terrence. He twitched, a moan escaping his lips. He was fighting for a life he didn't deserve. I quickly forwarded the entire chat history to my own secure cloud server and to my lawyer, Leonard Ross. Then I took a screenshot of the last message and sent it to my own phone. I sat back, sliding the phone back into my pocket. The ambulance hit a pothole, but I didn't feel it. I felt weightless. For months I had suspected. For weeks I had prepared. But now I knew. They were not just greedy. They were evil. And they had made the fatal mistake of thinking I was just a victim. I looked out the back window of the ambulance. I could see Sarah's car following us, weaving through traffic, desperate to catch up. She thought she was chasing a dying nephew and a confused old man. She didn't realize she was chasing her own destruction. I tapped the screen of my own phone, ensuring the files had uploaded. The upload bar turned green. Done. I looked at the paramedic. "Is he going to make it?" I asked. The paramedic shook his head. "Hard to say, Judge. His heart rate is all over the place. Whatever he took, it was potent." I nodded slowly. Yes, I said, staring at the gray face of my nephew. It was very potent indeed. We arrived at the hospital bay. The doors flew open. The cool night air hit my face. It felt like Judgment Day. As they unloaded the stretcher, I saw Sarah's car screech to a halt near the emergency entrance. She jumped out before it even stopped moving. She was running toward us, her heels clicking on the pavement like the ticking of a bomb. I stepped down from the ambulance, gripping my cane, and waited for her. I had the evidence. I had the high ground. And I had absolutely no mercy left to give. The fluorescent lights of the hospital emergency waiting room buzzed with a sound that grated against my nerves like a dental drill. I stood in the shadow of a vending machine watching the scene unfold with the detached precision of a man who had spent decades observing human guilt from a high bench. Sarah was not grieving. She was working. She had cornered the attending physician near the nurse's station. He was a young man, Dr. Patel, looking exhausted and overmatched by the blonde woman in the blood-spattered silk dress who was currently invading his personal space. I moved closer, leaning on my cane, keeping my footsteps silent on the linoleum floor. I needed to hear this. Sarah was speaking in a low, urgent whisper, her hand resting inappropriately on the doctor's forearm. She was using her full arsenal. Charm, vulnerability, and underneath it all, the cold steel of a threat. She was telling him that Terrence had a history of panic attacks. She was lying about a shellfish allergy. She was trying to plant a narrative before the toxicology screen could tell the truth. I saw Dr. Patel shake his head. He held a clipboard against his chest like a shield. I could see him explaining that the symptoms were inconsistent with anaphylaxis. He mentioned the foam at the mouth. He mentioned the erratic heart rhythm. Sarah's face hardened. The grieving cousin act vanished instantly. She leaned in closer. Her voice dropped an octave. I saw her hand slip into her purse. She wasn't reaching for a tissue. She was reaching for her checkbook. I knew that checkbook. It was linked to the joint account she shared with my son, which meant she was about to try and bribe a medical professional with my own money. She was desperate to stop the blood draw. If they found the digitoxin in Terrence's system, her life was over. She knew that hospitals were bureaucracies and bureaucracies could be manipulated. She just needed one person to look the other way, to mislabel a vial, to lose a sample. Dr. Patel looked uncomfortable. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning for a witness or a security guard. He stepped back from her. Sarah followed him, relentless. She was whispering about lawsuits now. She was threatening his medical license. She was claiming that my family had powerful lawyers who could destroy his career if he did not treat this as a simple allergic reaction. It was a bold, stupid move. She was used to bullying waitstaff and valets. She did not understand that tampering with a federal judge's family medical records was a felony that carried mandatory prison time. I stayed in the shadows, letting her dig her grave a few feet deeper. I wanted the doctor to remember this interaction. I wanted him to be the first witness when I put her behind bars. Sarah spun away from the nurse's station, her heels clicking angrily against the floor. She had failed to turn the doctor. Now she needed a new strategy. She needed to get Terrence out of this hospital before the tests came back. She marched toward the far corner of the waiting room where my son Tyrell was sitting with his head in his hands. He looked small. He looked defeated. He was a 34-year-old man who still looked like a child waiting for his parents to pick him up from the principal's office. I followed them, keeping my distance, using a large potted fern as cover. Sarah grabbed Tyrell by the lapels of his jacket and hauled him up from the plastic chair. She shoved him into the alcove near the restrooms, away from the prying eyes of the other patients. I moved to the wall adjacent to the alcove. I could hear everything. "Listen to me, you idiot," Sarah hissed. Her voice was pure venom. "We cannot leave him here. That doctor is going to run a full tox screen. Do you know what happens when they find the pill? Do you know what happens to us?" Tyrell was sobbing softly. "Sarah, I don't know what to do," he stammered. "I didn't know you were going to hurt him. I thought it was just a scare tactic." The sound of the slap was sharp and loud. It echoed in the small hallway. I flinched. I had never hit my son, not once. To hear her strike him, to hear the wet impact of her hand against his face ignited a fire in my belly that I had not felt in years. "Shut up," she snarled. "Stop crying. We are in this together. If I go down, you go down. I will tell them it was your idea. I will tell them you wanted your daddy's money so you could pay for your art studio and your failed gallery. Who are they going to believe? The grieving wife or the son who has been a disappointment his whole life?" She pulled a folded paper from her purse. It was a transfer form. She had come prepared. This woman had contingency plans for her contingency plans. "Sign this," she commanded. "It is a request to transfer Terrence to St. Jude's private clinic. My cousin works in administration there. We can control the narrative there. We can make the blood work disappear. Sign it as his next of kin." Tyrell hesitated. "But Sarah, he is not stable. Moving him could kill him." Sarah laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "He is already dead, Tyrell. He just hasn't stopped breathing yet. We are saving ourselves now. Sign the paper." She forced a pen into his hand. I heard the scratch of the pen tip against the wall as she pressed the paper against it using the drywall as a desk. She was physically forcing his hand, driving the ink across the page. My son was being coerced into obstruction of justice, and he was too weak to stop it. That was enough. I stepped around the corner. The sight of them froze my blood. Sarah had Tyrell pinned against the wall, her hand over his, forcing the signature. Tyrell's cheek was bright red from her slap. His eyes were wide with terror. They looked at me. Sarah froze. Tyrell dropped the pen. It clattered to the floor, rolling to a stop against my shoe. I did not shout. I did not raise my cane. I simply reached out and snatched the transfer form from Sarah's hand. She was too shocked to resist. I looked at the document. It was a liability waiver and a request for immediate discharge against medical advice. It was a death warrant for Terrence and a get-out-of-jail-free card for her. I ripped the paper in half, then in half again. I let the pieces flutter to the floor like confetti. "You are not moving him," I said. My voice was low, resonant, the voice that had sentenced men to death row. "You are not moving anyone." Sarah stepped back, her eyes darting to the exit. "You have no right," she spat. "You are not his father. I am his legal guardian," I reminded her, pulling my phone from my pocket. "And I am also a man who knows the hospital administrator very well." I tapped the screen, dialing a number I had saved years ago. I put it on speakerphone so they could both hear the ring. Dr. Vance picked up on the second ring. "Eldridge," he said, his voice warm but concerned. "I heard you were in the ER. Is everything all right?" I looked Sarah dead in the eye as I spoke. "No, Marcus, it is not. I need a favor. I need you to lock down the ICU wing. No transfers, no visitors, especially not family. I have reason to believe there is an active attempt to tamper with a patient's medical evidence." I heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Consider it done," Judge Dr. Vance said. "I will send security down immediately. Do you need police?" "Not yet," I said, never breaking eye contact with Sarah. "I want to let the rats run a little longer." I hung up. Sarah looked like she was about to vomit. Her plan A was gone. Her plan B was shredded on the floor. She looked at Tyrell, her eyes pleading for him to do something, anything. But I stepped between them. I turned my back on her and looked at my son. "Tyrell," I said. My voice was not angry. It was disappointed, which I knew hurt him worse. "Look at me." He raised his head, tears streaming down his face. He looked at the red mark on his cheek. I reached out and touched it gently. "She hit you," I said. It was a statement, not a question. He nodded, shame flooding his features. "Why are you letting her destroy us?" I asked. "Why are you letting her turn you into an accessory to murder?" Tyrell shook his head. "Dad," she said. "She said you were controlling us. She said we needed the money to be free." "Free," I repeated. I laughed, a bitter sound. "You think this is freedom? Signing death warrants in a hospital hallway, letting a woman slap you into submission. That is not freedom, son. That is slavery. And I am cutting the chains right now." I pulled out my own phone again. I opened my banking app. I showed him the screen. It showed his credit card account, the platinum card I paid for. The card Sarah used to buy her dresses and her influence. I tapped a button. The status changed from active to frozen. "I just cut you off, Tyrell," I said. "No more allowance, no more credit cards, no more access to the family trust. If she wants to be with you, she can be with you for who you are, not for what I give you." Sarah let out a shriek. "You can't do that," she yelled. "We have bills, we have a lease." "Not my problem," I said, turning back to face her. "You wanted to be the boss, Sarah. You wanted to run this family. Well, now you can run it on your own dime." Two large security guards turned the corner, heading toward us. Dr. Vance had been quick. I pointed my cane at Sarah. "Escort this woman out of the building," I told them. "She is harassing the family of the patient." Sarah looked at the guards, then at me. For a second I thought she might attack me, but she was a coward at heart. She sneered, straightened her dress, and looked at Tyrell. "Are you coming?" she demanded. "Or are you staying with Daddy?" Tyrell looked at me, then he looked at her. He looked at the frozen credit card notification that had just popped up on his own phone. He was weak. He was scared. But he wasn't stupid. He knew who held the power now. "I am staying," he whispered. Sarah's face twisted into a mask of pure ugliness. "Fine," she spat. "Rot in hell, both of you." She spun around and marched away, the security guards trailing her. I watched her go. She wasn't defeated yet. I knew that. She was just regrouping. But for the first time tonight, I had the high ground. I looked at Tyrell. He was sliding down the wall, weeping into his hands. I did not comfort him. He needed to feel this. He needed to understand the weight of his choices. I turned and walked toward the ICU. I had a nephew to watch die and a war to win. The silence in the hospital corridor was heavy and artificial, like the air inside a mausoleum. I stood near the vending machines, watching the digital clock on the wall tick away the seconds of my nephew's life. Tyrell had retreated to the chapel, likely to pray for a spine. That left me alone, or so I thought, until the click of heels announced her return. Sarah did not leave the building. She had simply regrouped. She walked toward me, not with the hysteria of the emergency room, but with the cold, predatory grace of a woman who believes she has already won the war. She stopped 3 feet from me. The hallway was empty. The nurses were busy behind the glass of the ICU station. It was just us. She looked at me, and for the first time since she married my son, she dropped the mask completely. There was no fake warmth, no daughter-in-law deference. Her face was hard angles and contempt. "You think you are so smart, Eldridge," she said. Her voice was a low hiss. "You think because you sat on a bench and banged a gavel for 50 years that you know how the world works, but you are obsolete. You are a relic." I did not respond immediately. I reached into my breast pocket and silently tapped the record icon on my phone screen, which was facing outward. I looked at her with the impassive stare I used to reserve for death row inmates. "I am still the guardian of this family, Sarah," I said calmly. "And I am the one holding the purse strings." She laughed. It was an ugly sound. "That is the problem with you people." She spat the words "you people" with a specific venom that hung in the air between us. "You accumulate wealth, but you do not know how to wield it. You sit on piles of cash and call it legacy. I call it waste. Tyrell is weak because you made him weak. Terrence was stupid because he was desperate. But me, I am neither weak nor stupid." She took a step closer, invading my personal space. I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the metallic scent of her fear. I should be the one running the Turner Foundation. I should be the one sitting on the board. I have the vision. You are just an old man holding on to power because you are terrified of becoming irrelevant. You should have died tonight. It would have been cleaner. We had a beautiful eulogy written for you. I listened to her confess her ambition. She did not care about Tyrell. She did not care about Terrence. She wanted the seat at the head of the table. She wanted the power that my name commanded in this city. She saw my skin color and my age as defects that disqualified me from my own empire. She believed that by virtue of her ruthlessness, she was the natural heir. "You speak of my death with great disappointment," I said, keeping my voice level. "Is that why you bought the pills? Is that why you texted Terrence asking if I was dead yet?" She smiled. It was a shark's smile. "You have no proof of that. You have a phone you stole from a crime scene. A good lawyer will have that thrown out as inadmissible fruit of the poisonous tree. You taught Tyrell that term. I listened. I learned. And when I take over, I am going to erase you. I am going to sell that dusty house. I am going to liquidate your assets, and I am going to build something that actually matters." I looked at her and felt a strange sense of pity. She thought she was playing for high stakes. She thought she was fighting for a few $1 million in a charity fund and a house in Buckhead. She had no idea what she was actually up against. She looked at me as a retired judge with a nice portfolio. She did not know about the trust. She did not know about Viola's final masterpiece. 30 years ago, when I was just starting on the federal bench, Viola told me that influence was more important than cash. She was a genius with numbers. While I was interpreting the law, she was quietly buying pieces of the infrastructure that broadcast it. She started small, radio stations, local papers. Then she moved to digital. Today, the Turner Family Trust owns 40% of Omni Media. It is a silent stake hidden behind 3 layers of shell corporations and blind trusts. We do not just have money. We own the news. We own the servers that host the data. We own the fiber optic cables that carry the lies Sarah was planning to tell. I looked at this woman standing in front of me thinking she could outmaneuver me. She was fighting for scraps while I owned the table, the kitchen, and the building the restaurant was housed in. I had prepared for this day. I had the power to kill a story or make it front-page news across the country with a single phone call. I had the power to freeze assets in banks she didn't even know existed. She thought she was the puppet master because she could manipulate my weak son and my greedy nephew. She did not realize she was dancing on strings I had woven decades ago. I kept my hand near my pocket, ensuring the microphone caught every word of her diatribe. She continued to insult me, calling me a dinosaur and a tyrant. She was giving me everything I needed to destroy her character in court. But she was also giving me something else. She was giving me the justification to unleash the full weight of my hidden empire. "You are quiet, Eldridge," she taunted. "Did I strike a nerve? Or are you finally realizing that your time is over?" "I am quiet, Sarah, because I am letting you dig," I said softly. "Dig what?" she asked, sneering. "Your grave," I replied. Suddenly, the double doors at the end of the hallway burst open. Blue and red lights flashed against the windows, reflecting off the polished floor. A squad of police officers marched in. They were not hospital security. They were Atlanta PD. Sarah's face lit up. She stepped back from me, smoothing her dress, transforming instantly from the vixen into the victim. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "There he is, officers," she shouted, her voice trembling with fake fear. "That is him. That is the man who poisoned his nephew." I watched the officers approach. There were 4 of them, led by a detective I did not recognize. He was young, ambitious, and clearly had not done his homework. He walked right past Sarah. He walked right up to me. "Eldridge Turner," he said, reaching for his belt. "I am Judge Turner," I corrected him, my posture straightening. "Not tonight, you aren't," the detective said. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "We received an anonymous tip and digital evidence linking you to the attempted murder of Terrence Turner. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." I looked at Sarah. She was standing behind the wall of blue uniforms. She was smiling. It was a smile of pure triumph. She had made the call. She had planted the seed while I was busy securing the hospital wing. She had probably sent a doctored video or a fake text message from a burner phone of her own. She had outpaced me in the short game. I looked at the handcuffs. They were silver and cold. For 50 years, I had been the one sending men away in these. Now they were for me. The irony was bitter, but I did not resist. I knew the law better than anyone in this building. Resisting arrest would only give them ammunition. I turned around slowly, offering my wrists. I felt the cold metal click shut against my skin. It was tight, painful. "You are making a mistake, detective," I said calmly. "A mistake that will cost the city millions." "Tell it to the judge," the detective said, shoving me forward. "I am the judge," I whispered to myself. As they marched me past Sarah, she leaned in close. Her voice was a whisper meant only for me. "Checkmate, old man," she said. "Don't worry about the house. I will take good care of it." I did not look at her. I walked with my head high, ignoring the stares of the nurses and the patients. Let her have her moment. Let her think she had won. She had just arrested the wrong man on false charges. She had escalated this from a family dispute to a federal incident. She thought she had put me in a cage. She didn't realize she had just locked herself in with the lion. The interrogation room was designed to break men. It was a concrete box painted a suffocating shade of beige with a single metal table bolted to the floor and a mirror that fooled no one. The air was stale, recycled, and smelled of nervous sweat and old coffee. I sat with my hands cuffed to the table, my back straight, my breathing even. I had sent men to rooms like this for 50 years. I knew the acoustics. I knew the temperature was kept deliberately low to induce shivering and anxiety. But I did not shiver. I waited. The door swung open and the young detective who had arrested me strode in. He was trying too hard. His sleeves were rolled up. His tie was loosened. He carried a tablet computer like it was a weapon. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't offer me water. He slammed the tablet onto the metal table, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small space. "Watch this," he commanded. I looked at the screen. It was grainy footage from the restaurant. It showed the dinner party. It showed me standing near the table. Then the video jumped. It skipped frames. It showed my hand reaching toward the glass. Then another jump. It showed Terrence drinking. Then another jump. It showed Terrence falling. It was a hack job, a clumsy, amateurish edit designed to create a narrative of guilt where none existed. The angle was convenient, obscuring Terrence's own hands while highlighting mine. It made it look like I had hovered over his glass, perhaps dropping something in before he drank. "We have you on tape, Eldridge," the detective said, leaning over me, invading my personal space. His breath smelled of peppermint and tobacco. "We have witness statements from Sarah Turner and your son Tyrell confirming you had a motive. They say you were jealous of your nephew. They say you were mentally unstable. And now we have the video. Attempted murder. That is 20 years minimum. At your age, that is a life sentence." He paused, waiting for me to crack. He expected tears. He expected a confession. He expected me to beg for a deal. "You can make this easier on yourself," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Just admit you made a mistake. Admit you were confused. Maybe we can plead it down to manslaughter if he dies. But if you make me work for it, I will make sure you die in prison." I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the Rolex Submariner on his wrist. It was brand new, the stainless steel gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. That watch cost $12,000. A detective's salary in Atlanta did not cover $12,000 impulse buys. Sarah had been busy. She hadn't just tipped him off, she had bought him. I leaned forward as far as the cuffs would allow. The chain rattled against the table. I looked deep into his eyes and saw the flicker of uncertainty buried beneath his bravado. He knew the evidence was weak. He knew the video was doctored, but he thought I was just a senile old man who wouldn't know the difference. "Are you finished, detective?" I asked. My voice was calm, devoid of fear. He blinked, surprised by my tone. "I am just getting started," he sneered. "No, you are not," I said. "You are finished. You just don't know it yet." I shifted in the metal chair, finding a position of power even while restrained. "Let us talk about the law, detective. Because you seem to have forgotten it. You are showing me a video with 3 distinct timecode jumps. Do you see the timestamp in the corner? It skips from 8:04:15 to 8:04:22. 7 seconds are missing. 7 seconds where the victim's hands are unaccounted for." The detective pulled the tablet back, trying to hide the screen. "That is just a glitch," he stammered. "It is spoliation of evidence," I corrected him, my voice rising like thunder. "In the case of Smith v. State, the appellate court ruled that deliberately altered video evidence is not only inadmissible, but it is grounds for immediate dismissal and sanctions against the prosecution. You are trying to build a case on a foundation of fraud." I looked at his wrist again. "And let us talk about Brady v. Maryland. You are required by law to disclose exculpatory evidence. By hiding the full tape, you are violating my due process rights. And when my lawyer finds out you are doing this at the behest of a third party, you will not just lose your badge. You will be sitting in this chair wearing these cuffs." The detective's face turned a shade of pale gray. He tugged at his collar. "Who said anything about a third party?" he asked, his voice cracking. I nodded at his wrist. "That watch," I said. "It is beautiful. Ceramic bezel, oyster steel. Did you buy that on a cop's salary? Or was it a gift from a grieving cousin-in-law who needed a favor? Sarah Turner pays well, does she not? But she does not pay enough to cover the federal indictment for corruption you are currently soliciting." He stepped back, hitting the wall. He was rattled. He realized suddenly that he was not interrogating a suspect. He was being cross-examined by a master. He tried to regain control. He slammed his hand on the table. "Shut up," he shouted. "You don't ask the questions here." "I do ask the questions," I said quietly. "Because I know the answers. I know you did not get a warrant for the raw server data. I know you took a thumb drive from Sarah outside the hospital. And I know that you are terrified because you realize you have made a mistake that is going to end your career." I sat back the metal chair, screeching against the floor. "Uncuff me, detective. Do it now, and maybe I will only sue the department for false arrest. Keep me here another 5 minutes, and I will personally see to it that you are indicted for conspiracy to commit murder." He stared at me, paralyzed. The sweat was beadings on his forehead now. He looked at the mirror, wondering who was watching, wondering if his career was already over. He reached for his keys, his hand trembling. Then he stopped. "No," he whispered. "She said you were guilty. She said the video proved it. I am not letting you go." Just then, the heavy steel door of the interrogation room did not just open. It was thrown open with such force that it slammed against the concrete wall with a deafening crash. The detective jumped, spinning around his hand, going to his holster. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked less like a lawyer and more like a battering ram in a three-piece suit. Leonard Ross. He was 6'4", broad-shouldered and holding a leather briefcase like it was Thor's hammer. Behind him stood the precinct captain looking terrified. Leonard did not say hello. He did not ask for permission to enter. He walked straight up to the detective and invaded his space so aggressively that the young man stumbled back into the corner. "You have exactly 10 seconds to get those cuffs off my client," Leonard growled. His voice was a deep baritone that vibrated in the small room. "Or I will have your badge, your pension, and your freedom before the sun comes up." "Who are you?" the detective squeaked. "I am the man who is going to ruin your life," Leonard said. He slammed his briefcase onto the table next to the detective's tablet. He popped the latches. Inside was a hard drive and a laptop. Leonard opened the laptop and spun it around. "This is the original footage," he announced, "from the hardwired security system that Judge Turner had installed in the restaurant 3 years ago because he owns the building." He hit the space bar. The video played. It was crystal clear, 4K resolution, no jumps, no skips. We watched in silence. We watched Terrence look around nervously. We watched his hands slide over my glass. We saw the white pill drop. It was undeniable. Then we watched me feign the cramp. We watched the fork drop. And we watched the spin. The Lazy Susan turned. The glasses swapped. Terrence picked up the fork. He drank. He fell. It was all there. The attempted murder. The poetic justice. The truth. Leonard looked at the detective. "That is the raw file authenticated by a forensic digital expert 10 minutes ago. Your video is a doctored fraud provided by Sarah Turner. You arrested the victim while the perpetrator is walking free." The precinct captain stepped forward, his face red with fury. "Miller, get those cuffs off him. Now. And give me your gun and your badge. You are suspended pending an internal affairs investigation." The young detective looked at me. His arrogance was gone. He looked like a child who had broken a window. He fumbled with the keys. His hands were shaking so bad he dropped them twice before he managed to unlock the cuffs. I rubbed my wrists, feeling the blood flow back into my hands. I stood up slowly, adjusting my cuffs, smoothing my jacket. I picked up my cane. I looked at the detective one last time. "Greed is a powerful motivator, son," I said softly. "But intelligence is a better one. Remember that when you are looking for a new line of work." Leonard put a hand on my shoulder. "Let's go, Eldridge. We have work to do. Do you want me to file charges against Sarah immediately? We have enough to bury her." I paused at the door. I thought about Sarah. I thought about her smug face in the hospital hallway. I thought about her telling me checkmate. If I arrested her now, she would fight. She would post bail. She would spin a story about being framed. She would use my money to hire a defense team. "No," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "Not yet. I don't want her in a cell. Not while she still has hope. I want her to lose everything first. I want her to watch her world crumble brick by brick. I want her to be destitute, friendless, and broken. Then we arrest her." Leonard nodded. He understood. He closed the briefcase. "What is the next move then?" I walked out into the busy precinct, the officers parting like the Red Sea to let us pass. "The next move is financial," I said. "She thinks she has the checkbook. She thinks she has the accounts. She doesn't know about the protocols." I checked my watch. It was 2:00 a.m. in Atlanta. That meant it was 8:00 a.m. in Zurich. The banks were just opening. I pulled the burner phone from my pocket. "Get the car, Leonard," I said. "I need to make a call to Switzerland. It is time to freeze her out." As we walked out into the cool night air, I felt a surge of energy. They had tried to poison my body. They had tried to poison my reputation, but all they had done was wake me up. The last gavel was about to come down, and when it did, the sound would shatter their entire world. The television in my study was an 80-inch window into a world of lies. I sat in my leather armchair sipping lukewarm water and watching Sarah perform the role of a lifetime. She had convened a press conference on the steps of the hospital. It was a strategic masterstroke. The imposing brick facade of the trauma center loomed behind her, lending gravitas to her performance. She was not wearing the blood-spattered silk dress anymore. She had changed into a modest gray suit, appearing small and vulnerable against the cluster of microphones. "My family is in crisis," Sarah said, her voice trembling just enough to register as authentic grief without sliding into hysteria. "We love Eldridge. We have always honored him. but age has taken a terrible toll on his mind. Tonight, that mental decline turned violent. She paused to wipe a tear that I knew she had summoned on command. She was painting me not as a villain but as a tragedy. It was smarter than attacking me directly. She was dismantling my credibility. She was creating a narrative where my accusations against her would be dismissed as the ravings of a dementia patient. "We are asking for privacy," she continued while staring directly into the lens of every major news camera in Atlanta. "We just want to get my father-in-law the help he desperately needs before he hurts anyone else. My husband Tyrell is devastated. We are all devastated." I looked at the ticker scrolling at the bottom of the screen. Turner Holdings was down 12% in after-hours trading. The market hates uncertainty, and Sarah had just injected a lethal dose of it into my legacy. My phone was buzzing on the desk. Board members, partners, senators. Everyone wanted to know if the Lion of Atlanta had finally lost his teeth. I did not answer them. I turned off the television. The room plunged into silence. The silence was not empty. It was heavy with potential. Sarah thought the battle was being fought in the media. She thought public opinion was the currency of this war. She was wrong. The war was being fought on servers she could not access, in ledgers she could not read. She had played her hand. Now it was time to sweep the chips off the table. I picked up the secure satellite phone I kept in the bottom drawer of my desk. It was a relic from a case involving international cartels, a precaution I had maintained for years. I dialed a number with a country code that began with 41. Switzerland. It was early morning in Zurich. The line connected with a sharp digital click. Heinrich Thepper said, "Judge Turner," the voice on the other end replied. It was crisp, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion. "We have been monitoring the news wires. The situation appears volatile." "It is about to get worse," I said. "I am initiating the Viola Protocol." There was a pause on the line, a heavy, significant silence. The Viola Protocol was not a standard banking instruction. It was a nuclear option my late wife had designed for a doomsday scenario. It was a scorched earth directive that did not just freeze assets. It liquidated positions, recalled loans, and flagged every associated Social Security number for immediate fraud investigation by the IRS and the SEC. "Are you certain?" Judge the banker asked. "This cannot be reversed. It will trigger audits on the foundation. It will freeze the personal accounts of all beneficiaries. It will lock the trust for a minimum of 5 years." I looked at the blank television screen. I thought of my nephew foaming at the mouth. I thought of my son signing a transfer order under duress. I thought of Sarah smiling as I was handcuffed. "I am certain," I said. "Burn it down, Heinrich. Every cent. If their names are on it, lock it. If they have a credit card linked to the trust, cancel it. If they have a lease guaranteed by my signature, revoke it. Leave them with nothing but the clothes on their backs." "Consider it done," the banker said. "The execution will take approximately 3 minutes to propagate through the global banking system. Good luck, Judge." The line went dead. I set the phone down. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. I counted. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Somewhere in the digital ether, firewalls were slamming shut. Credit limits were dropping to 0. The invisible streams of capital that fueled Sarah's lifestyle were drying up instantly. The trap was sprung. Now I just had to wait for the scream. Across town, in the private dining room of Bacchanalia, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, Sarah and Tyrell were celebrating. I knew they would be there. It was Sarah's favorite spot to be seen. She needed to project confidence. She needed to show Atlanta that the Turner family was still strong and that she was the new matriarch. They had ordered the tasting menu. They were drinking Dom Perignon. Sarah was likely holding court, telling anyone who would listen how hard it was to commit her beloved father-in-law to a facility. Tyrell would be nodding, drinking too much, trying to drown the guilt that I knew was eating him alive. The bill arrived on a small silver tray. The total would be north of $800. Sarah didn't even look at it. She pulled out the black Centurion card, the one linked to the family trust, the one she flashed like a badge of office. She dropped it on the tray with a dismissive wave of her hand. The waiter took it. He walked to the terminal. He swiped the card. "Decline." He frowned. He wiped the strip. He inserted the chip. "Decline. Do not honor. Retain card." The message on the terminal was specific. It was a fraud alert. The bank had flagged the card as stolen property. The waiter walked back to the table. The smile was gone from his face. The hospitality industry has a sixth sense for financial ruin. He knew a dead card when he saw one. "Ma'am, I am sorry," the waiter said loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "This card has been declined. The bank has instructed me to retain it." Sarah laughed. It was a sharp, incredulous sound. "Do you know who I am?" she demanded, snatching at the card. "Run it again. It is a Centurion card. It does not have a limit. I cannot run it again, ma'am," the waiter said, stepping back. "The system has locked it. Do you have another form of payment?" Sarah turned to Tyrell. "Give him your card," she snapped. Tyrell fumbled for his wallet. He pulled out his Visa. The waiter took it. He walked back to the terminal. "Decline." The waiter returned. "This one is also declined, sir." The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. The other diners were watching. The whispers started. Sarah's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "Call the bank, Tyrell. Fix this." Tyrell pulled out his phone. He dialed the private client service line. He put it to his ear. He waited. Then he pulled the phone away and stared at the screen. Service suspended. "My phone isn't working," he whispered. "It says the account has been deactivated." Sarah grabbed her own phone. No signal, the family plan, I paid the bill, and I had just canceled the service. They were stranded. In a 5-star restaurant with an $800 bill and no way to pay it, the manager appeared. He was not smiling. "Is there a problem, folks?" he asked. "My father-in-law is playing games," Sarah said, her voice rising to a shriek. "Send the bill to the Turner estate. We are leaving." She stood up, grabbing her purse. She tried to storm out, but the manager blocked her path. "You are not going anywhere until the bill is paid," the manager said. "Or I will call the police." Sarah looked around. She saw the faces of Atlanta's elite, people she wanted to impress, people she wanted to rule. They were looking at her with pity and amusement. She dug into her purse. She pulled out a wad of cash emergency money she kept for valets. She threw it on the table. It wasn't enough, but it was all she had. "Keep the change," she spat. She grabbed Tyrell's arm and dragged him toward the exit. They stumbled out onto the street. The cool night air should have been a relief. But it wasn't, because the valet was not bringing their car. Instead, a flatbed tow truck was backing up to the curb. The yellow lights flashed rhythmically, illuminating the sleek black Mercedes G-Wagon that Sarah drove. The driver was hooking chains to the axle. "Hey!" Sarah screamed, running toward them. "Hey, that is my car. What are you doing?" The driver didn't even look at her. "Repo order, ma'am," he said, chewing on a toothpick. "Lease was revoked an hour ago. Dealership wants it back." "You cannot take my car," she yelled, grabbing the door handle. "I have rights. Lady, let go of the truck or you are going for a ride," the driver said. He engaged the winch. The Mercedes lifted into the air, its tires spinning uselessly. Sarah watched her status symbol disappear down the street. She stood on the curb, shivering in her designer dress. Tyrell stood behind her, his head hanging low. "We have to go home," she said, her voice hollow. "Call a taxi." "We can't," Tyrell said. "No phones. No cash." They walked. 3 miles in heels. It took them an hour. They arrived at the estate, the grand house I had let them live in, rent-free. They walked up the driveway, exhausted, humiliated, and furious. Sarah marched to the front door. She punched the code into the smart lock. Nothing happened. The keypad was dark. She tried again. Nothing. She pounded on the door. "Open," she screamed. "Open, damn you!" Tyrell walked to the window and peered inside. "It is pitch black in there, Sarah," he said. She looked at the house. There were no landscape lights, no porch lights. The hum of the central air conditioning unit was gone. "The electricity," she whispered. He cut the power. It was more than the power. I had contacted the utility company and reported the property as vacant. I had contacted the security company and updated the access codes. I had turned their sanctuary into a fortress and locked them on the outside. They stood on the front lawn of the mansion they thought they owned. It was a monolith of stone and shadow. They were cold. They were broke. They were cut off from the world. Sarah sank to her knees on the manicured grass. She looked up at the dark sky and let out a scream of pure primal rage. It echoed through the neighborhood, a sound of total defeat. I sat in my study miles away in my safe house. I did not hear the scream, but I felt it. I poured myself another glass of water. The financial freeze was complete. They had experienced the luxury of my generosity. Now they were experiencing the reality of my absence. The next phase was about to begin. They would be desperate now. And desperate people make mistakes. I picked up my file on the Cayman accounts. It was time to introduce the FBI to my daughter-in-law. It was 3 in the morning when the pounding started on the heavy oak door of my estate. It was not the authoritative knock of the police or the confident rap of a visitor who belonged there. It was a desperate rhythmic thudding like a trapped bird throwing itself against a window pane. I knew who it was before I checked the security monitors. It was my son. I had returned to the main house an hour earlier, leaving the safe house to survey the perimeter. I wanted to be there when reality finally broke through the delusion my family had been living in. I walked to the door, my footsteps echoing in the silent foyer. I did not hurry. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open. Tyrell stood on the porch, bathed in the harsh yellow light of the motion sensors. He looked like a man who had survived a shipwreck. His designer suit was soaked through with sweat. His expensive loafers were scuffed and muddy. He had run 5 miles from the downtown impound lot where the tow truck had dumped them to the gates of the kingdom he thought he would inherit. He was alone. Sarah was likely waiting at a 24-hour diner, or perhaps she had found a friend with a couch and a bottle of wine. She would not lower herself to beg. Not yet. But Tyrell was different. He was soft. He looked at me and his face crumbled. "Dad," he gasped, his chest heaving. "Dad, please. You have to stop this. We have no money. We have no car. We walked for hours. Sarah is crying. She is terrified." I looked at him and I felt a deep, ancient ache in my chest. This was my boy, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy I had read to sleep. And now he stood before me begging not for forgiveness but for the restoration of his comfort. "Come inside, Tyrell," I said, stepping aside. He stumbled into the foyer, shivering as the air conditioning hit his damp skin. He looked around the house as if seeing it for the first time. The lights were dim, the shadows were long. "Dad," he said, his voice gaining a little strength now that he was inside. "You made your point. Okay, we get it. You are angry about the hospital. You are angry about the transfer papers. But you cannot just cut us off. It is cruel. Sarah is your daughter-in-law. She loves you. She was just trying to do what was best for Terrence." I walked past him toward the study. I did not offer him a towel. I did not offer him a drink. I offered him his only chance at salvation. "Follow me," I said. He followed me, trailing mud on the Persian rugs. We entered the study, the room where I had written my most famous opinions, the room where I had tried to teach him the value of integrity. I sat behind my desk. He stood in front of it, wringing his hands like a nervous defendant. "She does not love me, Tyrell," I said, my voice flat. "And she certainly does not love you." Tyrell's face flushed. "Do not say that," he snapped. "You do not know her. You only see the ambition. You do not see how she takes care of me. You do not see how she pushes me to be better. She believes in my art. She believes in my potential. She believes in your last name," I corrected him. "She believes in the 9 figures attached to the Turner Trust." He shook his head, backing away. "I knew you would say that. You have always hated her because she is white. You have always looked down on her because she didn't come from money. You are a snob, Dad. A bitter old snob." I opened the top drawer of my desk. Inside was Terrence's phone. I had cracked the passcode hours ago. It was 134, fitting for a man with zero imagination. I had spent the last hour combing through the voice notes and the deleted files. I found what I was looking for. A recording from 3 weeks ago. A conversation between Sarah and a man named Julian, a stockbroker she had been meeting for lunch while Tyrell was at his studio. I placed the phone on the desk. I did not argue. I did not defend myself against his accusations of prejudice. I simply pressed play. The audio was clear. Background noise of a busy cafe, clinking cups, then Sarah's voice, unmistakable and sharp. "I cannot wait much longer, Julian. I really can't. The old man is holding on like a tick. And Tyrell, God, Tyrell is exhausting." Then a man's voice, smooth and laughing. "Why don't you just leave him, Sarah? You are young. You are beautiful." Sarah's laugh was a sound I had never heard before. It was dark and throaty. "Leave him. And walk away with what? A settlement. No, I need the whole pie. Tyrell is a useless daddy's boy, Julian. He couldn't pour water out of a boot if the instructions were on the heel. He has no talent. His art is garbage. I have to pay the galleries to hang it just so he feels important." I watched Tyrell's face. The color drained from his skin, leaving him gray and sickly. He stopped breathing. The recording continued. Sarah's voice was full of contempt. "But he is manageable. That is his only virtue. He does what I tell him. He signs what I put in front of him. He is a golden retriever with a checkbook. Once Eldridge kicks the bucket, I will put Tyrell in a nice facility somewhere quiet. Maybe give him a painting studio to keep him busy, and then I will finally be free to live. With you, with money, with power. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Tyrell stood frozen. His mouth was open slightly. His eyes were wide, staring at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. I waited for the anger. I waited for him to scream at the woman who had played him for a fool. I waited for him to fall to his knees and apologize for bringing a viper into our home. But the anger didn't come. Instead, denial washed over his face. He shook his head slowly, then violently. "No," he whispered, "that is fake. You edited that. You hired someone to sound like her." I looked at him with pity. "Son," I said gently, "that was taken from Terrence's phone. Your cousin was recording everything. He knew what she was. He was using it as insurance." Tyrell stepped back, his hands balling into fists. But his fists were not aimed at Sarah. They were aimed at me. "You spied on us," he shouted, tears spilling down his cheeks. "You invaded our privacy. How could you do that? How could you listen to that and keep it? You want to hurt me. That is all you want. You want to prove you were right. You want to prove I am stupid." He was projecting. He was in agony, and he was lashing out at the only safe target he had. He could not accept that his marriage was a fraud, so he had to believe his father was a monster. "She loves me!" he screamed, his voice cracking. She was just venting. People say things they don't mean when they are stressed. You don't understand passion, Dad. You don't understand complex relationships. You just understand laws and rules. He turned and ran for the door. He was running back to her. He was going to go back to the woman who called him garbage because the truth was too painful to bear. He preferred the beautiful lie to the ugly reality. "Tyrell," I called out. "If you walk out that door, you walk out with nothing. No money, no home, no father." He stopped at the threshold. He didn't turn around. "I don't need your money," he said, sobbing. "And I don't need a father who destroys his son to win an argument." He slammed the door. The sound echoed through the empty house. I sat there in the silence, listening to his footsteps fade down the driveway. He was going back to the dark. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. I wiped it away impatiently. I had tried the gentle way. I had tried the truth. But the infection was too deep. Words were not enough to cut the cancer out of my family. I needed a scalpel. I picked up my secure phone again. It was time for the next phase. I dialed a number I had not called in 10 years. Carter, my old friend from the FBI. The man who handled problems that the law could not touch. Carter picked up on the first ring. He was an insomniac. He was always awake. "Judge," he said, his voice like gravel. "I saw the news. Looks like a mess." "It is a mess, Carter," I said, my voice hardening. "But I am going to clean it up. What do you need, Judge?" "I need you to initiate Operation Weed Removal," I said. There was a pause. "That is the extreme package, Judge. Full surveillance. Forensic accounting, asset seizure, psychological warfare. Are you sure? That is your family." "Not anymore," I said, staring at the empty doorway where my son had just vanished. "They are not family. They are hostiles, and I want them neutralized. Start with the Cayman accounts, then find the dealer who sold Sarah the pills. I want her in a cage, Carter, and I want Tyrell to be the one who locks it." "Done," Carter said. I hung up. I looked at the photo of Viola on my desk. Her eyes seemed sad. "I am sorry, my love," I whispered. "I tried to save him with love. Now I have to save him with pain." I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the night was black and cold. Somewhere out there, my son was walking back to his executioner. But he wouldn't die. I wouldn't let him die. I would burn his world to ash, and then I would pull him from the rubble. It was the only way. The last gavel had not yet fallen, but it was raised, and it was coming down fast. The dining room table was 20 feet of mahogany that I had commissioned 30 years ago to host governors and senators. Tonight it was set for 3 traitors and a judge. I sat at the head of the table, my back to the fireplace, where a low fire crackled despite the warm Atlanta evening. I wanted the room hot. I wanted them sweating. I had sent the message through Tyrell earlier that morning. I told him I was ready to surrender. I told him the media pressure was too much and that I was willing to discuss a transition of power. It was the bait they had been waiting for. They arrived at 8 o'clock sharp. The procession was pathetic and theatrical. Sarah led the way, pushing Terrence in a wheelchair. My nephew looked like a ghost. His skin was sallow and he had a blanket draped over his legs despite the heat. He was playing up the victim role for an audience of one. Tyrell trailed behind them, carrying a leather portfolio case. He would not meet my eyes. He looked at the floor, at the walls, at the chandelier, anywhere but at the father he had betrayed. "Please sit," I said, gesturing to the chairs I had positioned on the left side of the table. I wanted them grouped together, the defense table. Sarah parked the wheelchair and sat next to it. She looked tired, but triumphant. The financial freeze had hurt her. I could see it in the way she wore a dress from last season and the lack of professional grooming she usually mandated, but she thought the suffering was over. She thought she was here to collect the spoils of war. "You look terrible, Eldridge," she said, placing her hands on the table. "The media cycle has been rough on you." I did not respond to the jab. I simply poured myself a glass of water. My hand trembled slightly. It was a calculated affectation. I needed her to see weakness. I needed her to believe the lion was dying. "Let us skip the pleasantries, Sarah," I said, my voice raspy. "You have won. The accounts are frozen, but I cannot access them either. The stock price is tanking. I am tired of fighting. What do you want?" Sarah smiled. It was the smile of a butcher eyeing a prime cut. She snapped her fingers at Tyrell. "Give him the agreement." Tyrell slid a thick document across the mahogany. It slid to a stop in front of me. I put on my reading glasses and opened it. It was not a settlement, it was an unconditional surrender. It was a conservatorship agreement. It basically says that you voluntarily relinquish control of the Turner estate, the charitable foundation, and all personal assets to a board of trustees consisting of myself, Tyrell, and Terrence. She explained, her voice light and breezy. "In exchange, we will drop the lawsuits. We will issue a statement saying your mental health has stabilized, and we will move you into the Meadows." The Meadows was a high-end warehousing facility for the wealthy and senile. It was a prison with thread count sheets. I read the clauses. They wanted 80% of the liquid cash immediately. They wanted power of attorney. They wanted the right to sell the real estate. It was a masterclass in greed. And if I refuse, I asked, looking up over my spectacles. Sarah leaned forward. "Then we released the second video, the one where you threatened Terrence a week before the dinner. We have witnesses who will testify you were losing your mind. We will bury you, Eldridge. You will die in a state facility surrounded by strangers instead of in a luxury suite paid for by your loving family." I looked at Terrence. He was smirking. The poison had nearly killed him, but the promise of money had revived him. "Uncle E," he rasped, his voice damaged from the intubation. "Just sign it. It is over. You had a good run." I looked at Tyrell. "Son, is this what you want? To put your father in a home and strip mine his life's work?" Tyrell swallowed hard. "Dad, you are not well. Sarah says this is the only way to protect the legacy. You almost killed Terrence. We have to take control before you hurt someone else." He actually believed it. She had twisted his reality so thoroughly that he believed he was doing the righteous thing. He was lost. I picked up the heavy fountain pen from the desk set. I held it over the signature line. Sarah's eyes widened. She held her breath. She was watching the ink tip hovering over the paper, visualizing the millions flowing into her accounts. I let the pen hover. My hand shook. Then I set the pen down. "Before I sign, Sarah, I have a legal question," I said. She sighed, rolling her eyes. "What is it now?" "I spent 50 years studying the sentencing guidelines for federal crimes." I said, my voice suddenly steady and strong. The tremble in my hand vanished. I took off my glasses and set them on the document. "Do you know the mandatory minimum sentence for conspiracy to commit murder crossing state lines?" Sarah froze. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, otherwise known as RICO," I said. "You see, Sarah, you didn't just try to kill me. You used electronic communications to plan it. That makes it wire fraud. You moved money from a charity to pay for it. That makes it embezzlement. And you did it in concert with 2 or more people. That makes it a criminal enterprise." I reached under the table and pulled out a thick red file folder. I tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding toward her. "Open it," I commanded. Sarah stared at the folder. She didn't move. "Open it," I roared, slamming my hand onto the table. The sound made Tyrell jump. Terrence flinched in his wheelchair. Sarah reached out with a shaking hand and flipped the cover open. The first photograph was an 8x10 glossy taken with a long-range lens. It showed Sarah standing in the parking lot of a seedy motel on the outskirts of Atlanta. She was handing an envelope of cash to a man with neck tattoos. That man is known on the street as Spider, I said. He is a mid-level dealer in pharmaceuticals. He is currently in custody. Carter, my associate, picked him up 3 hours ago. He was very eager to cut a deal. He identified you, Sarah. He said you specifically asked for something that would mimic a heart attack. Sarah flipped the photo over. The next document was a bank ledger. It showed a transfer of $50,000 from the Viola Turner Foundation to a shell company in the Caymans. And this, I continued pointing to, the ledger, is the paper trail you thought you hid. You thought because you used a VPN and a shell company that I wouldn't find it. But you forgot that I wrote the charter for that bank in the 80s. I know the regulators. I know the back doors. I stood up slowly. I did not need the cane. I walked toward them. You are not here to negotiate a surrender, Sarah. You are here to hear the charges. Attempted murder, grand larceny, elder abuse, conspiracy. If I hand this file to the district attorney tomorrow, you will go away for 30 years. Tyrell will go for 10 as an accessory, and Terrence will go to the prison infirmary until he rots. Sarah stared at the photos. Her face was pale, but her eyes were still defiant. She was cornered, but she was not broken. Not yet. She stood up, grabbing the folder. This proves nothing, she hissed. It is just pictures and numbers. You have no context. Spider is a criminal. His word is worthless against mine. I am a respected member of the community. You are a senile old man with a vendetta. She grabbed the contract, the one she wanted me to sign, and she ripped the red folder in half. She tore the photos, she tore the ledgers, she threw the pieces into the air like confetti. There she screamed, her voice shrill and manic. It is gone. You have no copies, you have no leverage. It is your word against ours, and there are 3 of us. She looked at Tyrell and Terrence. Tell him we never saw this. Tell him he is hallucinating. We never saw anything, Tyrell whispered obediently. Terrence laughed, a dry, hacking sound. Nice try, Uncle E. But you need a witness. You need someone who was in the room when the decisions were made, and the only people in the room were family. And family sticks together. Sarah smiled. It was a terrible rictus of a smile. You see, Eldridge, you lose. Without a witness, this is all just a story, and nobody believes your stories anymore. I looked at the shredded paper on the floor. I looked at the 3 of them united in their corruption. They truly believed they were untouchable because they had destroyed the physical evidence. They thought the circle of trust was unbreakable. You are right, Sarah, I said softly. I do need a witness. A living witness. Someone who was in the room. Someone who knows where the bodies are buried. I picked up a small remote control from the table. Fortunately, I found one. I pressed the button. The heavy oak doors at the far end of the dining room began to open slowly. The mechanism groaned. Sarah turned around. Tyrell stood up. Terrence gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. They expected the police. They expected lawyers. But they did not expect the person who walked through the door. She was small, trembling, slightly clutching a purse to her chest. She wore a simple dress and a look of terrified determination. Sarah's face went slack. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Terrence made a noise like a strangled cat. It was Jasmine. Jasmine was Terrence's executive assistant at the foundation. The woman Sarah had fired 2 weeks ago. The woman Sarah had threatened to blacklist from every job in Atlanta if she ever spoke about the discrepancies in the accounts. Jasmine walked into the room. She did not look at me. She looked straight at Sarah. "Hello, Sarah," Jasmine said, her voice shaking but audible. Sarah lunged forward. "Get out!" she screamed. "You have no business here. You are a disgruntled employee. Nobody will believe you." I stepped between them. My presence was a wall she could not pass. "She is not just an employee," I said. "She is the keeper of the books. And unlike you, she kept backups." Jasmine reached into her purse. She pulled out a silver USB drive. She held it up. The light from the chandelier caught the metal. "I have the audio, Sarah," Jasmine said. "I recorded the meeting where you told Terrence to buy the poison. I recorded the call where you told Tyrell to shut up and sign the checks. I have it all." Sarah stopped. The color drained from her face completely, leaving her looking like a wax figure. She looked at the USB drive. Then she looked at Terrence. "You idiot," she whispered. "You said she was handled. You said she was scared." Terrence was shaking his head back and forth. She was supposed to be gone. She was supposed to leave town. "I gave her a reason to stay," I said. I gave her protection. I gave her a salary, and I gave her a chance to do the right thing. Sarah looked around the room. Her eyes were wild. The trap had snapped shut. The walls were closing in. She looked at the shredded papers on the floor, then at the USB drive in Jasmine's hand. She realized that tearing up the photos had been a meaningless gesture. The digital ghost of her crimes was immortal. She looked at Tyrell. He was staring at Jasmine with his mouth open. "Do something," Sarah shrieked at him. "Grab that drive." Tyrell didn't move. He looked at Jasmine. He looked at me. The reality of what his wife had done was finally piercing the fog of his denial. "She is not lying, is she?" Tyrell asked, his voice quiet. "You really did it. You really planned to kill him." "Shut up, you coward," Sarah yelled. She realized she was losing him. She realized she was losing everything. She turned back to me. Her eyes were full of hate, but also desperation. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the cornered ferocity of a rat. "This isn't over," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You think a flash drive scares me. You think I didn't prepare for this." She reached into her oversized designer purse. I thought she was reaching for her phone to call a lawyer. I thought she was reaching for a checkbook to try and bribe Jasmine. I was wrong. Her hand came out holding a snub-nosed .38 caliber revolver. The metal was black and ugly against the fine china and crystal. She pointed it straight at Tyrell's head. "Sit down," she commanded, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "Everyone sit down or I will blow his brains out." The room went deadly silent. The fire crackled. Jasmine gasped and covered her mouth. Terrence whimpered. I looked at the gun. Then I looked at Sarah. She had escalated the game. We were no longer in a legal battle. We were in a war zone. And the first casualty was about to be my son. "You are right, Sarah," I said, my voice cutting through the thick tension of the room like a scalpel. "I do need a witness. I need someone who was there when the ink was wet. Someone who knows where the bodies are buried and who held the shovel. You thought you had scrubbed the timeline clean. You thought firing your staff and threatening them with lawsuits was enough to buy their silence. But you forgot the most basic rule of power. Never create an enemy who has nothing left to lose." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote control. It was the same one I used to control the heavy security shutters on the windows, but today it had a different purpose. I pressed the single red button. The heavy oak doors at the far end of the dining room began to groan. The sound was mechanical and ominous, drowning out the crackle of the fireplace. Sarah spun around, her eyes widening. Tyrell stood up so fast his chair screeched against the hardwood floor. Even Terrence tried to push himself up in his wheelchair, his neck straining to see what was coming. They expected the police. They expected a SWAT team. They expected men with guns and badges. They did not expect a young woman in a simple beige cardigan and sensible shoes clutching a handbag to her chest as if it contained the nuclear codes. It was Jasmine. For 3 years, Jasmine had been the executive assistant at the Turner Foundation. She was the one who balanced the books. She was the one who scheduled the meetings. And she was the one Sarah had fired 2 weeks ago, calling her incompetent and threatening to blacklist her from every office in Atlanta if she ever spoke about the discrepancies in the ledger. Sarah thought she had crushed her. She thought Jasmine was a bug she had stepped on and forgotten. But I had found the bug, and I had given her a shield. Jasmine walked into the room. She was trembling. Her face was pale and she looked like she might faint at any moment. But she kept walking. She walked past the empty chairs. She walked past Tyrell, who looked at her with the confusion of a man waking up from a coma. She walked right up to the edge of the mahogany table and stopped 3 feet from Sarah. "Hello, Sarah," Jasmine said. Her voice was shaking, but it was audible. It was the sound of a mouse standing up to a cobra. Sarah's face went slack. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was the first time in 10 years I had seen her speechless. She stared at Jasmine as if she were seeing a ghost. Then the shock turned to rage. Pure, unadulterated fury. "What is she doing here?" Sarah shrieked, turning to me. "This is a private family meeting. Get this trash out of my sight. She is a disgruntled employee. She was fired for theft. Anything she says is a lie." I stepped forward, positioning myself between Sarah and Jasmine. My presence was a wall she could not pass. She was fired because she asked why $50,000 was moved to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, I said. She was fired because she refused to sign the fraudulent expense reports you put on her desk. And she is here because she has something you thought you destroyed. Jasmine reached into her purse. Her hand was shaking so badly she had to use both hands to unzip the small pocket. She pulled out a silver USB drive. It was small, innocuous, and terrifying. She held it up. The light from the chandelier caught the metal, making it shine like a blade. "I kept backups," Sarah Jasmine said. Her voice gained a little strength. "I knew you were moving money. I knew you were setting me up to take the fall. So I copied everything. I have the audio from the office cameras. I have the emails you thought you deleted. I have the chat logs where you told Terrence to buy the poison." The room went deadly silent. Sarah looked at the silver drive. It was the only thing in the world that mattered. The paper trail I had thrown on the table was a copy. This was the source. This was the digital DNA of her crime. Sarah lunged. It was a desperate, animalistic movement. She threw herself across the corner of the table, clawing at Jasmine's hand, trying to snatch the drive. "Give it to me!" she screamed. "Give it to me, you little rat!" I caught Sarah by the shoulder. I did not use my cane. I used my hand. I gripped her with the strength of a man who had been chopping wood for 40 years. I shoved her back. She stumbled her heels, catching on the rug, and she fell hard onto the floor. "Stay down," I commanded. Sarah scrambled backward, her eyes wild. She looked at Tyrell. "Do something," she yelled at him. "She is lying. They are all lying. It is a conspiracy." Tyrell did not move. He was staring at Jasmine. He knew Jasmine. He had brought her coffee when he visited the office. He knew she was honest. He knew she was quiet. And he knew she would never lie about something like this. "Is it true?" Jasmine Tyrell asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Do you really have recordings?" Jasmine nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Tyrell. I heard them planning it. I heard Sarah tell Terrence that the old man had to die before the quarter ended because the balloon payment on the gambling debts was due. She said if he didn't die, you would all lose everything." The mention of the gambling debts hit the room like a physical blow. Terrence let out a strangled noise from his wheelchair. He had been silent, trying to make himself invisible, trying to calculate his odds of survival. But now his name was in the air. His motive was exposed. Terrence looked at the USB drive. Then he looked at Sarah, who was picking herself up from the floor. He saw the look in her eyes. It was a look of total abandonment. She was going to cut him loose. She was going to blame him for everything. He realized in that split second that the only person who could save him was the uncle he had tried to kill. It was her idea, Terrence shouted. His voice was raspy, damaged from the intubation tubes, but it was loud enough to shatter the remaining loyalty in the room. He pointed a shaking finger at Sarah. "She made me do it." Sarah froze. She turned slowly to look at him. "Shut your mouth, you idiot," she hissed. "No, I will not shut up," Terrence cried. He gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, his knuckles white. "She told me the pill was just a sedative. She said it would make you sick, Uncle Eldridge. She said it would make you have a stroke so we could get power of attorney. She promised it wouldn't kill you. She lied to me." "You are a liar," Sarah screamed, taking a step toward him. "She found the dealer," Terrence continued, the words spilling out of him like vomit. "She gave me the cash. She told me when to drop it. She said if I didn't do it, she would tell the bookies where I lived. She said they would break my legs. She forced me, Tyrell. You have to believe me. She is the one who wanted him dead." The alliance was not just cracking. It was disintegrating. The three-way pact of silence and greed had shattered under the weight of the truth. Terrence was sobbing now, great heaving breaths that racked his thin frame. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for mercy. "I did not want to kill you, Uncle E," he wept. "I just wanted the money. I just wanted to be free." I looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You wanted to be free, so you enslaved yourself to a murderer," I said. Sarah was vibrating with rage. Her chest heaved, her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. She looked from Jasmine to me and finally to Terrence. She realized she was alone. The narrative she had constructed, the story of the loving family protecting the senile patriarch, was gone. She was exposed as the architect of a failed assassination. "You pathetic cripple," she spat at Terrence. "You couldn't even do one simple job right. You had one task, drop a pill in a glass, and you let him switch them. You drank it yourself, you moron. You deserve to be in that chair." The cruelty of her words stunned the room. Tyrell flinched as if he had been slapped. He looked at his wife, and for the first time he truly saw her. He saw the monster beneath the makeup. "Sarah." "Sarah, stop," Tyrell whispered. But she could not stop. The dam had broken. She marched over to the wheelchair, towering over the broken man she had manipulated. "You are weak," she shouted. "You are all weak. That is why you need me. That is why I had to do this. Because none of you have the stomach to do what is necessary." Terrence looked up at her, his face wet with tears and snot. "You are crazy," he said. Sarah did not respond with words. She responded with violence. She pulled her hand back and slapped him. It was a vicious, full-force blow that snapped his head to the side. The sound was sickening, a crack of skin against skin that echoed in the high ceilings of the dining room. Terrence cried out, covering his face with his hands, trying to curl into a ball in his chair. Sarah raised her hand again, ready to strike him a second time, ready to beat the obedience back into him. "Hey," Tyrell shouted. It was the loudest I had ever heard my son speak. He lunged forward, grabbing Sarah's arm mid-swing. He spun her around, placing himself between her and his cousin. "Don't you touch him!" Tyrell roared. His face was red, his veins bulging in his neck. "He is helpless. What is wrong with you?" Sarah tried to pull her arm free, but Tyrell held on. He looked at her, and the adoration that had been in his eyes for 5 years was gone. It was replaced by horror. "You hit him!" Tyrell said, his voice trembling with shock. "You hit a man in a wheelchair. You poisoned my father. You stole from the charity. Who are you?" "I am the only one trying to save this family," Sarah screamed right in his face. "I did this for us, Tyrell, for your art, for your future. Do you think your paintings sell because they are good? I buy them. I use the foundation money to buy your garbage art so you can feel like a big man." Tyrell released her arm as if it were burning hot. He stumbled back. "You what?" he whispered. "I buy them." She laughed, a cruel, manic sound. "I have a storage unit in Jersey full of your terrible paintings. You are a joke, Tyrell. Everyone knows it. Your father knows it. Terrence knows it. I am the only one who cleans up your mess." Tyrell looked at me. I did not look away. I did not confirm it, and I did not deny it. He saw the truth in my silence. He saw the years of pity. He crumbled. He sank to his knees on the rug, his hands covering his face as he began to weep. It was the sound of a man losing his entire identity in a single moment. Sarah stood over him, panting, her hair disheveled, her eyes wild. She looked like a queen surveying the ruins of her kingdom. She turned to me. "See what you did?" she hissed. "You broke him. Are you happy now, Judge?" I looked at my son weeping on the floor. I looked at my nephew cowering in his wheelchair. I looked at the brave young woman clutching a USB drive like a lifeline. "I did not break him, Sarah," I said, my voice cold and final. I woke him up. Sarah looked around the room. She saw the doors. She saw Jasmine. She saw me. She realized there was no way out. The legal battle was lost. The social battle was lost. She had no allies. She had no money. She had no cover. She reached for her purse, which was sitting on the sideboard. Her movements were jerky and fast. I tensed, thinking she was going to run. I thought she was going to grab her keys and flee into the night. I was wrong. She did not pull out keys. She did not pull out a phone. She pulled out a matte black snub-nosed revolver. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from tragedy to terror. Jasmine gasped and dropped the USB drive. It clattered on the floor. Terrence went silent. Sarah turned the gun toward Tyrell. Her hands were shaking, but the barrel was steady enough at this range. "Get up," she commanded, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "Get up, Tyrell. We are leaving." Tyrell looked up, his eyes blurry with tears. He saw the gun. He saw his wife looking at him down the sights. He didn't move. He couldn't move. "I said get up," she screamed, cocking the hammer. The click was the loudest sound in the world. I stepped forward, raising my hands slowly. "Sarah, look at me," I said. "Put it down. There is no coming back from this." She swung the gun toward me. "Stay back, old man," she warned. "I have nothing left to lose. You took my money. You took my reputation. You took my life. If I am going down, I am taking this whole house with me." She pointed the gun back at Tyrell. "Get up, or I swear to God I will paint the walls with your brains." We were no longer in a courtroom. We were no longer in a negotiation. We were in a slaughterhouse, and Sarah was holding the knife. The barrel of the .38 caliber revolver was a black eye staring unblinkingly at my son's forehead. Sarah held the weapon with a two-handed grip that betrayed her lack of training, but emphasized her lethal intent. Her knuckles were white. Her chest heaved beneath her silk blouse. She was vibrating with a chaotic energy that was far more dangerous than the cold precision of a professional killer. A professional calculates risk. Sarah had stopped calculating. She was operating on pure survival instinct and rage. I watched Tyrell. He was on his knees, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the snot running from his nose. He looked at the woman he had married, the woman he had defended against my counsel for 5 years, and he finally saw the truth. She was not his partner. She was his captor, and now she was his executioner. Sarah put the gun down. I said, my voice low and steady. I kept my hands visible, palms open, showing her I held no weapon. You are making a mistake that you cannot fix. Put it down, and we can talk. Talk, she screamed, her voice cracking. Talk about what? About how you destroyed me, about how you froze my accounts and towed my car. There is nothing to talk about, old man. There is only action. You want to save your precious son. Then you are going to open that safe. She gestured with the gun barrel toward the painting on the far wall. Behind the portrait of Viola was a wall safe. She knew it was there. She knew I kept emergency cash and bearer bonds inside. She had been cataloging my assets for years, waiting for the moment to liquidate them. Open it, she commanded, swinging the gun back to Tyrell's head. Open it, or I will open his skull. I did not move toward the safe. I took a step toward her. Sarah flinched. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The cylinder of the revolver rotated slightly. One more pound of pressure and the hammer would drop. Stay back, she shrieked. I swear I will do it. I hate him. I hate you. I hate this whole family. You think you are better than me? You think because you have money and history that you can look down on me? Well, look at me now. I am the one holding the gun. I am the one in charge. She was unraveling. The facade of the sophisticated socialite had melted away, revealing the raw, ugly greed beneath. She was projecting all her failures, all her insecurities onto us. In her mind, she was the victim. We were the villains who had forced her to violence. It was the classic logic of the abuser. I looked at Tyrell. He was paralyzed. He was waiting to die. I knew I had to act. I knew that reasoning with her was impossible. She had crossed the Rubicon. She had pulled a gun in a room full of witnesses. She knew she was going to prison. The only currency she had left was my son's life, and she intended to spend it to buy her freedom. I stopped moving. I stood tall, my spine straightening against the weight of my 68 years. I looked at her with the full force of my authority. I did not look at the gun. I looked into her eyes. You are not in charge, Sarah, I said, my voice booming in the silent room. You are a trespasser. You are a thief, and you are a coward. She gasped. How dare you, she hissed. I dare because I know you, I continued. I know where you came from. I know what you are. You thought you could marry into this family and steal our soul. You thought Tyrell was weak so you could break him. And you were right. He is weak. I glanced down at my son. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with shame. He is weak because he has a good heart, I said, my voice softening slightly. He trusts people. He believes in love. He believes in art. He is not a shark like you. He is not a killer. I turned my gaze back to Sarah. The gun was shaking violently now. But I am, I said. The words hung in the air. Sarah blinked, confusion warring with her rage. I have sent men to the electric chair, Sarah, I said, stepping closer. I have signed warrants that ended lives. I have looked into the eyes of monsters far scarier than you, and I have not blinked. You think this gun gives you power. It only gives you a sentence. She laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. You are bluffing, old man. You are unarmed. You are helpless. Open the safe. I will not open the safe, I said, and you will not shoot him. Why not, she challenged. Because I love him. Because I promised his mother I would protect him. Because he is Viola's son. I roared, my voice shaking the crystal in the cabinets. And as long as there is breath in my body, you will not harm a hair on his head. You called him garbage. You called him useless. But he has something you will never have. He has honor. He has blood that is worth more than all the money in that safe. Sarah's face twisted. Honor, she spat. Honor doesn't pay the bills. Honor doesn't buy power. This buys power. She raised the gun, aiming it directly between Tyrell's eyes. Her expression hardened. She was going to do it. She was going to kill him just to hurt me, just to prove she could. Say goodbye to Daddy Tyrell, she whispered. I did not scream. I did not lung. I did not beg. I had prepared for this moment. I had anticipated the violence because violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. I tightened my grip on my cane. It was made of solid hickory topped with a heavy brass handle. It was not just a walking aid, it was a tool. I lifted the cane and slammed it down onto the hardwood floor with all my strength. Crack. The sound was sharp and percussive like a gunshot itself. It was the signal. The house responded instantly. I had spent a fortune upgrading the security system after a death threat during the cartel trials 10 years ago. It was a system designed for a siege. It was designed to disorient and incapacitate. The moment the acoustic sensor in the floorboard registered the specific frequency of the impact the protocol initiated, metal shutters slammed down over the windows with the force of a guillotine crashing into place and sealing the room in steel. The sound was deafening, a mechanical roar that drowned out Sarah's scream. Simultaneously, the main breaker for the dining room tripped. The chandelier died. The sconces died. The fire in the hearth was the only source of light, and the shutters had created a vacuum effect that sucked the oxygen toward the chimney, dimming the flames to a dull orange glow. The room plunged into near-total darkness. It was chaos. Absolute engineered chaos. I dropped to the floor, moving with a speed that belied my age. I knew the layout of the room by heart. I knew exactly where Tyrell was kneeling. I knew exactly where Sarah was standing. I heard Sarah scream in the dark. It was a sound of pure panic. She was blind. She was disoriented. The sudden noise and the darkness had stripped away her control. I scrambled forward on my hands and knees. My objective was simple: shield the target. I found Tyrell. He was curled into a ball, sobbing. I grabbed his jacket. "Get down," I whispered urgently. "Stay down." "Where are you?" Sarah shrieked. "I will kill you. I will kill all of you." I saw the muzzle flash before I heard the sound. Bang! The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. The flash illuminated the room for a split second like a strobe light in a nightmare. In that brief flash, I saw her. She was spinning around, firing blindly into the dark. Her face was a mask of terror and rage. She wasn't aiming anymore. She was just shooting. Bang! A second shot tore into the mahogany table, sending splinters of wood flying. I threw myself over Tyrell, covering his body with mine. I buried his head in my chest. I felt him shaking. "Dad," he cried out. "Dad." "Hush," I whispered. "Don't move." Bang! The third shot was closer. I felt the wind of the bullet pass near my ear. It shattered a vase on the sideboard. She was emptying the cylinder. She had 6 shots. 3 were gone. I held my son tight. I smelled the gunpowder in the air. I smelled the fear. "Come out," Sarah screamed. "Come out and die." She fired again. Bang! This time I felt it. It wasn't a sharp pain, not at first. It felt like someone had punched me in the shoulder with a sledgehammer. The impact spun me slightly, knocking the wind out of me. A burning sensation spread rapidly across my upper back. I gritted my teeth, stifling a groan. I could not make a sound. If she knew where I was, she would finish the job. Dad, Tyrell whispered, "You are bleeding." I pressed my hand over his mouth. "Quiet," I hissed. I felt the warm, sticky flow of blood soaking into my shirt. It was running down my arm. My shoulder was on fire, but I was alive. And Tyrell was alive. 2 shots left. I waited in the dark, listening to her breathing. It was ragged and harsh. She was moving. I could hear her heels clicking on the floor. She was walking toward us. She was hunting. I gripped my cane, which I had dragged with me. I calculated the distance. She was maybe 5 feet away. If she took one more step, she would trip over us. I tensed my muscles, ignoring the searing pain in my shoulder. I had one good arm left. And I had one swing. The footsteps stopped. I could hear the mechanism of the revolver clicking as she cocked the hammer for the 5th time. "I know you are there," she whispered. "I can hear you breathing." I held my breath. I tightened my grip on the cane. This was it. The final verdict. Suddenly the room exploded with light. The barrel of the .38 caliber revolver was a black eye staring unblinkingly at my son's forehead. Sarah held the weapon with a 2-handed grip that betrayed her lack of training but emphasized her lethal intent. Her knuckles were white. Her chest heaved beneath her silk blouse. She was vibrating with a chaotic energy that was far more dangerous than the cold precision of a professional killer. A professional calculates risk. Sarah had stopped calculating. She was operating on pure survival instinct and rage. I watched Tyrell. He was on his knees, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the snot running from his nose. He looked at the woman he had married, the woman he had defended against my counsel for 5 years, and he finally saw the truth. She was not his partner. She was his captor, and now she was his executioner. Sarah put the gun down. I said, my voice low and steady. I kept my hands visible, palms open, showing her I held no weapon. You are making a mistake that you cannot fix. Put it down and we can talk. Talk, she screamed, her voice cracking. Talk about what? About how you destroyed me, about how you froze my accounts and towed my car. There is nothing to talk about, old man. There is only action. You want to save your precious son. Then you are going to open that safe. She gestured with the gun barrel toward the painting on the far wall. Behind the portrait of Viola was a wall safe. She knew it was there. She knew I kept emergency cash and bearer bonds inside. She had been cataloging my assets for years, waiting for the moment to liquidate them. Open it, she commanded, swinging the gun back to Tyrell's head. Open it, or I will open his skull. I did not move toward the safe. I took a step toward her. Sarah flinched. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The cylinder of the revolver rotated slightly. One more pound of pressure, and the hammer would drop. Stay back, she shrieked. I swear I will do it. I hate him. I hate you. I hate this whole family. You think you are better than me. You think because you have money and history that you can look down on me? Well, look at me now. I am the one holding the gun. I am the one in charge. She was unraveling. The facade of the sophisticated socialite had melted away, revealing the raw, ugly greed beneath. She was projecting all her failures, all her insecurities onto us. In her mind, she was the victim. We were the villains who had forced her to violence. It was the classic logic of the abuser. I looked at Tyrell. He was paralyzed. He was waiting to die. I knew I had to act. I knew that reasoning with her was impossible. She had crossed the Rubicon. She had pulled a gun in a room full of witnesses. She knew she was going to prison. The only currency she had left was my son's life, and she intended to spend it to buy her freedom. I stopped moving. I stood tall, my spine straightening against the weight of my 68 years. I looked at her with the full force of my authority. I did not look at the gun. I looked into her eyes. You are not in charge, Sarah, I said, my voice booming in the silent room. You are a trespasser. You are a thief. And you are a coward. She gasped. How dare you, she hissed. I dare because I know you, I continued. I know where you came from. I know what you are. You thought you could marry into this family and steal our soul. You thought Tyrell was weak so you could break him. And you were right. He is weak. I glanced down at my son. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with shame. He is weak because he has a good heart, I said, my voice softening slightly. He trusts people. He believes in love. He believes in art. He is not a shark like you. He is not a killer. I turned my gaze back to Sarah. The gun was shaking violently now. But I am, I said. The words hung in the air. Sarah blinked, confusion warring with her rage. I have sent men to the electric chair, Sarah, I said, stepping closer. I have signed warrants that ended lives. I have looked into the eyes of monsters far scarier than you, and I have not blinked. You think this gun gives you power. It only gives you a sentence. She laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. You are bluffing, old man. You are unarmed. You are helpless. Open the safe. I will not open the safe, I said, and you will not shoot him. Why not, she challenged. Because I love him. Because I promised his mother I would protect him. Because he is Viola's son, I roared, my voice shaking the crystal in the cabinets. And as long as there is breath in my body, you will not harm a hair on his head. You called him garbage. You called him useless. But he has something you will never have. He has honor. He has blood that is worth more than all the money in that safe. Sarah's face twisted. Honor, she spat. Honor doesn't pay the bills. Honor doesn't buy power. This buys power. She raised the gun, aiming it directly between Tyrell's eyes. Her expression hardened. She was going to do it. She was going to kill him just to hurt me, just to prove she could. Say goodbye to Daddy Tyrell, she whispered. I did not scream. I did not lung. I did not beg. I had prepared for this moment. I had anticipated the violence because violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. I tightened my grip on my cane. It was made of solid hickory topped with a heavy brass handle. It was not just a walking aid. It was a tool. I lifted the cane and slammed it down onto the hardwood floor with all my strength. Crack! The sound was sharp and percussive like a gunshot itself. It was the signal. The house responded instantly. I had spent a fortune upgrading the security system after a death threat during the cartel trials 10 years ago. It was a system designed for a siege. It was designed to disorient and incapacitate. The moment the acoustic sensor in the floorboard registered the specific frequency of the impact the protocol initiated, metal shutters slammed down over the windows with the force of a guillotine crashing into place and sealing the room in steel. The sound was deafening, a mechanical roar that drowned out Sarah's scream. Simultaneously, the main breaker for the dining room tripped. The chandelier died. The sconces died. The fire in the hearth was the only source of light, and the shutters had created a vacuum effect that sucked the oxygen toward the chimney, dimming the flames to a dull orange glow. The room plunged into near total darkness. It was chaos. Absolute engineered chaos. I dropped to the floor, moving with a speed that belied my age. I knew the layout of the room by heart. I knew exactly where Tyrell was kneeling. I knew exactly where Sarah was standing. I heard Sarah scream in the dark. It was a sound of pure panic. She was blind. She was disoriented. The sudden noise and the darkness had stripped away her control. I scrambled forward on my hands and knees. My objective was simple: shield the target. I found Tyrell. He was curled into a ball, sobbing. I grabbed his jacket. "Get down," I whispered urgently. "Stay down." "Where are you?" Sarah shrieked. "I will kill you. I will kill all of you." I saw the muzzle flash before I heard the sound. Bang! The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. The flash illuminated the room for a split second like a strobe light in a nightmare. In that brief flash, I saw her. She was spinning around, firing blindly into the dark. Her face was a mask of terror and rage. She wasn't aiming anymore. She was just shooting. Bang! A second shot tore into the mahogany table, sending splinters of wood flying. I threw myself over Tyrell, covering his body with mine. I buried his head in my chest. I felt him shaking. "Dad!" he cried out. "Dad!" "Hush!" I whispered. "Don't move!" Bang! The third shot was closer. I felt the wind of the bullet pass near my ear. It shattered a vase on the sideboard. She was emptying the cylinder. She had 6 shots. 3 were gone. I held my son tight. I smelled the gunpowder in the air. I smelled the fear. "Come out!" Sarah screamed. "Come out and die!" She fired again. Bang! This time I felt it. It wasn't a sharp pain. Not at first. It felt like someone had punched me in the shoulder with a sledgehammer. The impact spun me slightly, knocking the wind out of me. A burning sensation spread rapidly across my upper back. I gritted my teeth, stifling a groan. I could not make a sound. If she knew where I was, she would finish the job. Dad, Tyrell whispered, "You are bleeding." I pressed my hand over his mouth. "Quiet," I hissed. I felt the warm, sticky flow of blood soaking into my shirt. It was running down my arm. My shoulder was on fire, but I was alive. And Tyrell was alive. 2 shots left. I waited in the dark, listening to her breathing. It was ragged and harsh. She was moving. I could hear her heels clicking on the floor. She was walking toward us. She was hunting. I gripped my cane, which I had dragged with me. I calculated the distance. She was maybe 5 feet away. If she took one more step, she would trip over us. I tensed my muscles, ignoring the searing pain in my shoulder. I had one good arm left, and I had one swing. The footsteps stopped. I could hear the mechanism of the revolver clicking as she cocked the hammer for the 5th time. "I know you are there," she whispered. "I can hear you breathing." I held my breath. I tightened my grip on the cane. This was it. The final verdict. Suddenly the room exploded with light. The sudden return of the electricity was not a gradual dawn, but a blinding supernova that scoured the shadows from every corner of the dining room. The chandeliers blazed to life at full intensity, searing our retinas after the suffocating darkness. I blinked against the glare, my eyes watering. Sarah screamed. It was a sound of pure sensory overload. She was standing in the center of the room, spinning in a circle, her weapon waving erratically. She had lost her night vision and her target acquisition all at once. I saw her eyes squeeze shut against the brilliance. I saw her finger convulse on the trigger. It was not a decision. It was a reflex born of terror. The barrel leveled not at me, but at the man cowering on the floor behind me. My son. Tyrell was frozen, his hands over his head, his body a curled ball of surrender. The geometry of the shot was undeniable. If she fired, the bullet would strike him in the center of his chest. I did not think. Thinking takes time, and I had none. I moved. I lunged to my left, throwing my body across the line of fire. It was the last athletic act of a 68-year-old man, and I put every ounce of my remaining strength into it. The gunshot cracked through the room. It was louder than the others. I felt the impact instantly. It was not like the movies. It did not push me back. It felt as if a white-hot branding iron had been thrust through my upper chest, just below the collarbone. The air left my lungs in a sharp whoosh. The force spun me around, and I collapsed onto the hardwood floor, my back hitting the leg of the heavy mahogany table. Dad Tyrell screamed. His voice was high and thin like a child's. I looked down at my shirt. A dark red flower was blooming rapidly on the white silk, spreading with terrifying speed. It was warm and wet. The smell of copper and gunpowder filled my nose. My arm went numb. My fingers refused to close. I tried to speak, but only a cough came out, flecked with red. Sarah opened her eyes. She saw me on the floor. She saw the blood pooling beneath me. She saw Tyrell scrambling toward me, his hands covered in my blood. For a second, a look of triumph crossed her face. She raised the gun again. She had one bullet left. One bullet to finish the job. One bullet to execute the witness and the husband she despised. "Goodbye, Eldridge," she hissed. She took a step forward, leveling the sights at my head. But she never pulled the trigger. The steel security shutters covering the floor-to-ceiling windows did not rise. They exploded. A series of concussive blasts rocked the foundation of the house. The metal sheets were blown inward, twisted like tinfoil by shaped charges placed by experts. Glass shattered into a million diamonds, raining down on the parquet floor. Smoke billowed into the room, acrid and gray. Through the smoke came the cavalry. They did not walk. They flowed into the room like a black tide. Men in tactical gear with rifles raised and laser sights cutting through the haze. They moved with a synchronized violence that was beautiful to behold. Federal agents, one of them roared, his voice amplified. "Drop the weapon! Drop it now!" Sarah spun toward the window, her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked at the gun in her hand, then at the wall of armored men advancing on her. She hesitated. It was the hesitation of a narcissist who cannot believe her script has been rewritten. She raised the revolver toward the lead agent. It was a suicide move. 3 tasers fired simultaneously. The sound was a sharp electrical crackle. The probes hit her in the torso and thigh. Her body went rigid. Her mouth opened in a silent scream as 50,000 volts locked her muscles. The gun flew from her hand, skittering across the floor and spinning to a stop near Terrence's wheelchair. Sarah collapsed. She hit the floor hard, her face smashing into the rug. Before she could twitch, 2 agents were on her. A knee pressed into her back. Her arms were wrenched behind her. The sound of zip ties ratcheting tight was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. "Secure the room," an agent shouted. "Clear." I looked toward the door. Carter walked in. He was not wearing tactical gear. He was wearing a trench coat and a look of grim satisfaction. He walked past Sarah, who was writhing on the floor, spitting curses into the carpet. He walked past Terrence, who had fallen out of his wheelchair in the chaos and was sobbing into his hands. Carter knelt beside me. "You cut it close," Judge Carter said. He pressed a trauma pad against my shoulder. The pressure was agonizing, but I did not flinch. I had to wait for the confession, I wheezed. "Did you get it? We got it," Carter confirmed. "Audio and video. The whole thing is in the cloud. She is done, Eldridge. She is buried." I nodded, closing my eyes for a moment. The pain was a dull roar now, a constant background noise. I felt a hand on my face, shaking, wet. "Dad. Dad, look at me." I opened my eyes. Tyrell was hovering over me. His face was a mask of absolute devastation. He was covered in my blood. It was on his hands, his shirt, his face. He looked at the wound in my shoulder, then at my eyes. He looked like a man waking up from a 10-year coma. "Why?" he asked. His voice broke. Tears carved clean lines through the grime on his cheeks. "She tried to kill you. I betrayed you. I let her hurt you. I let her steal from you. Why did you jump? Why did you save me?" I looked at him. I saw the weakness that Sarah had exploited. I saw the fear. But I also saw the son I had held in my arms when he was an infant. I saw the boy who used to paint pictures of our family before the world told him he wasn't good enough. I reached up with my good hand. I grabbed his lapel, pulling him closer. My strength was fading, but my resolve was iron. "Because you are my son," I whispered. The effort cost me breath I did not have. Tyrell shook his head, sobbing harder. "I am worthless." She was right. I am garbage. I stood there and watched her. I signed the papers. I deserve to die. "No," I said. My voice was a rasp. "You deserve to live with it. That is your punishment and your chance." The agents were hauling Sarah to her feet. She was not going quietly. She was kicking and screaming. Her mask was gone. The sophisticated socialite was dead. In her place was a creature of pure hate. "Let me go," she shrieked. "You cannot arrest me. I am the victim here. Look at him. Look at Tyrell. He made me do it. He wanted the money. He hates his father." Tyrell looked up. He looked at his wife. He heard her lies. He saw her face twisted and ugly, spitting venom at the agents. He saw her eyes lock onto him, and there was no love there. There was only calculation. She was already building her defense. She was already throwing him to the wolves. "You witch," Tyrell whispered. It was the first time he had ever spoken against her. "I spat on you," Sarah yelled as they dragged her toward the door. "I spat on your whole family. You are nothing. You are weak. You should have died in the gutter." Carter stepped in front of her. He leaned close. His voice was low, but in the silence of the room we all heard it. "You have the right to remain silent," Carter said. "I suggest you use it because every word you say is digging you deeper into a hole you will never climb out of. Get her out of here." The agents marched her out. Her screams faded down the hallway, replaced by the wail of sirens approaching the house. The paramedics were coming. I looked back at Tyrell. He was trembling. He looked at his hands stained with my blood. He looked at the empty doorway where his wife had vanished. The illusion was shattered. The spell was broken. He was alone. "Dad," he said again, softer this time, "I am so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she was capable of this. You knew I said. I did not offer him false comfort. I did not lie to him. You knew she was greedy. You knew she was cruel. You just didn't think she would use a gun. You thought she would use a pen. You thought you could profit from the cruelty without getting blood on your hands." Tyrell flinched. He looked away, unable to hold my gaze. "I saved you, Tyrell." I continued, my voice growing faint as the blood loss took its toll. "But not because you earned it. I saved you because I made a promise." He looked back at me, confusion warring with his grief. "A promise. To who?" "To Viola," I whispered. The name of his mother hung in the air between us. Viola. The woman who had built this empire. The woman who had loved him with a ferocity that frightened even me. Before she died, she made me swear, I said. She knew you were soft, Tyrell. She knew the world would eat you alive. She made me promise that no matter what you did, no matter how far you fell, I would not let you die. I would not let the wolves take you. I coughed, wincing as the pain spiked in my chest. "I kept my promise," I said. "I took the bullet, but the rest is up to you. I cannot save you from yourself." The paramedics burst into the room. They swarmed around me, pushing Tyrell back. They were cutting my shirt, applying pressure, checking vitals. I felt the prick of a needle. The edges of my vision began to blur. I saw Tyrell standing in the center of the ruined dining room. He looked small. He looked lost. But he was alive, and for the first time in his life, he was free. He was free of Sarah. He was free of the lie. As the darkness closed in, I felt a strange sense of peace. The gavel had fallen. The verdict was delivered. The sentence had been served. Now we would see if rehabilitation was possible. I closed my eyes and let the sirens carry me away. 3 months had passed since the bullet tore through my shoulder and shattered the illusion of my family. The physical wound had healed into a jagged knot of scar tissue that ached when it rained, but the psychological wound remained open and raw. I sat in the front row of the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta, watching the proceedings with the critical eye of a man who had spent half a century on the other side of the bench. The courtroom was packed. The media had turned the case of United States versus Sarah Turner into the trial of the decade. They called it the sweet tea poisoning. They called it the Buckhead betrayal. I called it a tragedy. Sarah sat at the defense table. She had abandoned the designer silk for a modest cardigan and reading glasses, trying to project the image of a misunderstood librarian rather than a sociopathic social climber. She looked thinner. Her skin was pale from months in pretrial confinement. But her eyes were the same. They were hard, flinty, and constantly scanning the room for an escape route. Beside her sat Thaddeus Sterling, the most expensive defense attorney in the South. He was a man I had known for years, a legal pit bull who specialized in getting monsters acquitted on technicalities. Sterling was currently pacing in front of the jury box, weaving a narrative of victimhood that was as impressive as it was nauseating. He claimed Sarah was a victim of psychological abuse. He claimed I was a tyrant who controlled my family with money and fear. He claimed the shooting was an act of desperate self-defense against a man who had threatened to destroy her life. It was a good story. It played on the jury's natural distrust of the wealthy and powerful. If I had been sitting in the gallery as a layman, I might have believed it, but I was not a layman. I was the star witness, and I knew exactly where Sterling was leaving his flanks exposed. The bailiff called my name. I stood up. I did not use a cane. I walked to the witness stand with a steady, purposeful stride. I raised my right hand. I swore to tell the truth. I sat down and adjusted the microphone. I looked at Sarah. She stared back, her expression a mask of practiced fear. She was trying to unsettle me. She was trying to make me look like the angry old man she had described to the press. I did not give her the satisfaction. I remained impassive. I was not Eldridge the victim. I was Judge Turner the institution. Sterling approached the stand. He smiled, a shark-like baring of teeth. "Good morning, Judge Turner," he said, emphasizing the title with a hint of mockery. "Or should I call you Mr. Turner, since you are here as a private citizen involved in a domestic dispute? You may call me whatever you wish, Mr. Sterling," I replied, my voice calm and resonant. "The facts remain the same regardless of the title." Sterling nodded, pacing back and forth. "The facts. Yes, let us talk about the facts. Is it true that you cut off your son's financial support on the night in question? Is it true that you threatened to leave him destitute?" "It is true," I said. "And is it true that you have a history of using your wealth to control the behavior of your family members, that you use your money as a weapon?" "I used my money as a shield, Mr. Sterling," I corrected him. "I cut off the funds because I discovered they were being used to finance a conspiracy to murder me. I believe most reasonable people would consider that a prudent financial decision." Sterling stopped pacing. He leaned against the jury box. "A conspiracy. That is a strong word. But isn't it true that the only person who actually administered poison was your nephew Terrence? Sarah never touched the glass. Sarah never touched the pill. You are trying to imprison a woman for the actions of a drug-addicted gambler, aren't you?" I leaned forward slightly. The trap was set. He was trying to separate Sarah from the act. He was trying to argue lack of direct action. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "are you familiar with the Pinkerton liability rule?" Sterling blinked. "Excuse me. It is a legal principle established by the Supreme Court." I continued, turning my gaze to the jury, explaining the law as I had done thousands of times before. "It states that a conspirator is liable for all criminal acts committed by co-conspirators in furtherance of the conspiracy. Sarah did not need to drop the pill. She bought it. She planned it. She funded it. Under the law, her hand was on that glass just as surely as Terrence's was." Sterling flushed. He did not like being lectured on the law in his own arena. He changed tactics. He moved to the shooting. "Let us move to the night of the arrest. You admit you trapped my client in your home. You admit you cut the power and sealed the windows. You created a terrifying environment. You frightened a woman who was already under extreme stress. When she fired that gun, she was in a state of panic induced by your actions. She was not trying to kill anyone. She was firing blindly in the dark out of fear." I shook my head slowly. "That is incorrect, Mr. Sterling." "Incorrect how? It was dark, wasn't it? She couldn't see what she was shooting at. She could not see, I agreed, but she could hear. And before she fired, she spoke. She issued a specific threat." Sterling waved his hand dismissively. "Hearsay. We only have your word for what was said in the dark." I smiled. It was a cold, dry smile. "No, Mr. Sterling. We do not just have my word. You seem to have forgotten the discovery packet my counsel sent over this morning. Or perhaps you didn't check your email before coming to court." Sterling froze. He looked at the prosecutor table. The U.S. attorney was grinning, holding up a small flash drive. "I installed that security system myself, Mr. Sterling," I said. "It does not just close the shutters. It activates infrared cameras and high-fidelity microphones in every corner of the room. The system is designed to record kidnapping attempts and home invasions. It records everything, even in the dark." I turned to the judge presiding over the case, Judge Anderson, a woman I had mentored 20 years ago. Your Honor, the prosecution would like to enter Exhibit 4B into evidence. The security footage from the dining room. Sterling objected immediately. Objection, Your Honor. We have not had time to review this. It is a surprise ambush. Overruled, Judge Anderson said, banging her gavel. It was submitted into discovery 48 hours ago, Counselor. If you didn't review it, that is incompetence, not grounds for objection. Play the tape. The courtroom lights dimmed. A large screen descended from the ceiling. The jury leaned forward. Sarah stood up halfway out of her chair, her face draining of all color. Sit down, Mrs. Turner, the bailiff barked. She sank back down, her hands trembling violently. The video began. It was in grainy green and white night vision, but the resolution was sharp. It showed the dining room plunged into darkness. It showed Tyrell cowering on the floor. It showed me crawling toward him, shielding him with my body. And it showed Sarah. She stood in the center of the room, holding the gun with both hands. She was not panicking. She was hunting. The microphone picked up her breathing. It was heavy but steady. Then her voice filled the courtroom, amplified by the speakers. Say goodbye to Daddy Tyrell, she whispered. The jury gasped. It was not a cry of fear. It was an execution order. The video showed her fire. The muzzle flashes bloomed white-hot on the screen. It showed her tracking the sound of our movement. It showed her adjusting her aim. Then came the moment of truth. The lights in the video blazed on. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, but she didn't lower the weapon. She fired blindly toward the sound of Tyrell's scream. The video showed me diving. It showed my body jerking as the bullet slammed into my shoulder. It showed me hitting the floor bleeding, and then it showed the aftermath. Sarah opening her eyes, Sarah seeing me bleeding, Sarah seeing Tyrell alive, and Sarah raising the gun again. Goodbye, Eldridge, she hissed on the tape. She took a step forward. She leveled the sights at my head. She was going to finish it. She was seconds away from murder when the windows exploded inward and the FBI agents swarmed the room. The tape ended. The lights in the courtroom came back up. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of a room that had seen the face of evil and recoiled. There was no defense for this. There was no panic. There was no confusion. It was cold-blooded, predatory violence caught in high definition. Sterling sat down heavily in his chair. He knew it was over. He put his head in his hands. He didn't even look at his client. I looked at Sarah. She was staring at the blank screen. Her mouth was opening and closing like a fish on a hook. The narrative she had built, the victimhood, the tears, the lies, it had all been incinerated by the cold green light of the infrared camera. The prosecutor stood up. The government rests, Your Honor. The jury did not need to deliberate for long, I knew that. But Sarah wasn't going to wait for the verdict. The reality of her situation crashed down on her all at once. The life sentence, the prison cell, the end of everything she had schemed for. She stood up abruptly, knocking her chair over. No, she screamed. Her voice was raw and animalistic. That is fake. He doctored it. He controls everything. She pointed at me, her finger shaking. He is the devil. He ruined my life. He turned my husband against me. It is not fair. I deserve that money. I earned it. I put up with his weak son for 5 years. I earned every penny. She was confessing. In her rage, she was confirming everything I had said. She was admitting that her marriage was a job and the inheritance was her salary. Order, Judge Anderson shouted, banging her gavel. Restrain the defendant! 2 marshals moved toward her. Sarah backed away, wild-eyed. Don't touch me, she shrieked. I am Sarah Turner. I am a Turner. You are nothing, I said from the stand. My voice was quiet, but in the silent courtroom it carried to the back row. You are a trespasser, and you have been evicted. Sarah lunged toward me. She scrambled over the defense table, papers flying everywhere. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to scratch the truth off my face. The marshals tackled her before she made it 3 steps. They slammed her to the floor. She kicked and bit, screaming obscenities that would make a sailor blush. She cursed Tyrell. She cursed Terrence. She cursed the judge. She revealed the ugly racist's core she had hidden under layers of politeness for years, screaming about how she shouldn't be judged by people beneath her. It took 3 officers to cuff her and drag her out of the courtroom. Her screams echoed down the hallway long after the doors had swung shut. I sat on the witness stand watching the empty door. I felt a heavy weight lift from my chest. It was done. The poison had been drawn out. The wound could finally begin to heal. I looked at the jury. They looked back at me with respect and sympathy. I looked at Tyrell sitting in the back row. He was crying quietly. He had seen the video. He had seen his father take a bullet for him. He had seen his wife try to execute him. Judge Anderson looked at me. "You may step down, Judge Turner," she said gently. I stood up. I walked past the defense table where Sterling was packing his briefcase with the speed of a man fleeing a burning building. I walked down the aisle. I stopped next to Tyrell. "Let us go home, son," I said. He stood up and followed me out of the courtroom. We walked out into the bright Atlanta sun, leaving the darkness behind us forever. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my son came back to the house on West Pace's Ferry. The estate was quiet now. The police tape was gone. The broken glass in the dining room had been swept away and the shutters replaced, but the air still held the metallic tang of violence that no amount of cleaning could scrub out. I was in my study reviewing the final dissolution papers for the marriage that had nearly killed me. My shoulder throbbed, a dull, rhythmic reminder of the bullet I had taken. It was a permanent ache, a barometer for the coming rain, and a receipt for the price of fatherhood. Tyrell knocked on the open door. He looked better than he had at the trial. He had shaved. He was wearing a suit I had bought him 3 years ago, a navy blue wool that fit him well. He held a leather portfolio in his hands, clutching it like a shield. He looked like a man ready for a job interview. In a way, I suppose he was. He was interviewing for the position of son. "Come in, Tyrell," I said without looking up from the documents. He walked in and stood before the desk. He did not sit. He waited for permission. I let the silence stretch. I wanted to see how long he could hold his composure. I wanted to see if the spine I had glimpsed in the hospital was real or just a phantom limb. "Dad," he started, his voice steady but thin, "I wanted to talk to you about the future." I took off my reading glasses and looked at him. "The future," I repeated. "That is a broad subject. I want to come back," he said. "I want to work at the foundation. I know I messed up. I know I was blind, but Sarah is gone. Terrence is gone. You need help. You need someone you can trust to rebuild the reputation of the charity. I want to be that person. I want to make it right." He placed the portfolio on the desk. Inside were sketches, ideas for new community outreach programs, rebranding concepts. It was diligent work. It was the kind of work a college graduate presents to impress a professor. He thought that effort was the currency required to buy back his place at the table. He thought that because the villain was in prison, the story could reset to the beginning. He thought we could go back to the way things were, just without the wife who held the gun. I looked at the sketches. They were good. Tyrell had always had an eye for design, but design was not the problem. Structure was the problem. I closed the portfolio and slid it back toward him. "No," I said. Tyrell blinked. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean you are not coming back to the foundation," I said. "You are not coming back to this house. You are not coming back to the allowance or the credit cards or the safety net." "But Dad," he stammered, confusion clouding his face. "I am your son. I testified against her. I saved your life in that dining room. I stood up to her." "You stood up to her after she slapped you," I corrected him, my voice rising slightly. "You stood up to her after she pulled a gun. You stood up to her when you had absolutely no other choice. That is not courage, Tyrell. That is survival. A rat will fight when it is cornered. That does not make it a lion." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling lawn. I needed to look at the horizon because looking at his shattered face was almost too much to bear. But I had to do this. I had to break the bone to reset it. "You think Sarah was the problem?" I said, turning back to him. "You think she was a demon who possessed you? You think you are a victim who fell under her spell?" That is a comforting lie. But it is a lie. I walked over to him, leaning on the edge of the desk. "Sarah was a predator, Tyrell. Predators hunt. That is their nature. We cannot blame the wolf for eating the sheep, but we can blame the shepherd who left the gate open." I pointed a finger at his chest. "You were the gate. You let her in. You saw the greed in her eyes and you called it ambition. You heard her insult your family and you called it honesty. You watched her isolate you from your father and you called it love. You were not a victim. You were an accomplice." Tyrell stepped back, shaking his head, tears welling in his eyes. "I didn't know she would kill you," he whispered. "You didn't want to know," I snapped. Because knowing would have required you to do something. It would have required you to be a man. It would have required you to get a job, to pay your own rent, to define yourself by something other than your last name. You traded your integrity for comfort. You let a sociopath steer the ship because you were too lazy to take the wheel. I took a breath, calming myself. The anger was useful, but it had to be precise. Your cowardice was the soil in which her evil grew. I said, my voice lower now, but harder. If you had stood up to her 5 years ago when she fired the first housekeeper for no reason, we would not be here. If you had told her no when she demanded the platinum card, we would not be here. You fed the beast Tyrell, and then you acted surprised when it tried to eat us. Tyrell was crying now, silent tears that tracked down his face. You hate me, he choked out. I laughed, a sad, hollow sound. Hate you. I took a bullet for you. I crawled across this floor, bleeding out my life to shield you. I love you more than I love this house, more than I love my money, more than I love my own life. I grabbed him by the shoulders, shaking him slightly. I love you enough to tell you the truth, and the truth is that you are soft. You are soft because I made you soft. I gave you everything Viola wanted you to have, but I forgot to give you what you needed. I forgot to give you struggle. I forgot to give you hunger. I released him and walked back to the desk. I opened the top drawer. Inside was a plain white envelope. I had prepared it the day the verdict came in. I knew this moment was coming. I picked up the envelope and held it out to him. This is the last thing I will ever give you, I said. Tyrell looked at the envelope. He reached out his hand, trembling, and took it. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single plane ticket and a cashier's check. Seattle, he read, looking up at me. Why Seattle? Because nobody knows you there, I said. Because the name Turner means nothing in the coffee shops and the shipyards of the Pacific Northwest. You are not going there as the son of a judge. You are going there as a man who needs a job. He looked at the check. $10,000, he whispered. Dad, this won't last 3 months. Then you better find work quickly, I said. That is not a stipend, Tyrell. That is seed money. It is enough for a deposit on a studio apartment and a used car. It is enough to buy canvas and paint. If you want to be an artist, but be a hungry one. Paint because you have to, not because I paid a gallery to hang it. He looked at me, terror warring with realization in his eyes. You are kicking me out. I am setting you free, I said firmly. I am cutting the cord that is strangling you. As long as you are near me, you will be Tyrell, the judge's son. You will be a target for the next Sarah who walks through the door. You need to build a shell, Tyrell. You need to find out who you are when there is no safety net to catch you. I walked to the door of the study and opened it. The car is waiting to take you to the airport, I said. Your bags are already packed. Tyrell stood there for a long moment holding the envelope. He looked around the room, the library of leather-bound books, the smell of old paper and history. He looked at the life he was losing. Then he looked at me. He straightened his shoulders. It was a small movement, but it was real. He wiped his face with his sleeve. Will I ever see you again? He asked. That depends on who comes back, I answered. If Tyrell the victim comes back, the door will remain locked. But if Tyrell the man comes back, if a man who pays his own bills and fights his own battles comes back, then the door will be open. He nodded. He understood. It was a harsh sentence, but it was a just one. He walked toward the door. He stopped in front of me. He looked at my shoulder where the scar was hidden beneath my shirt. Thank you, he said softly, for saving my life. Save it again, I said. Save it yourself this time. He walked out. I watched him go down the hallway. He did not look back. He walked out the front door and into the bright Atlanta sunlight. I watched through the window as he got into the town car. I watched it drive away down the long driveway past the iron gates and onto the main road. When the car was out of sight, I closed the heavy oak door. The sound was final. The house was silent. I was alone. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. I felt an immense weight press down on me. It was done. The poison was purged. The limb was severed. It hurt. God, it hurt. But it was the only way to ensure survival. I pushed myself away from the door. I adjusted my jacket. I had a meeting with the board of the foundation in an hour. I had to appoint a new director. I had to secure the legacy. I walked back into my study. I sat down at my desk. I picked up the phone. It was time to call Jasmine. The house was empty, but it was clean. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe. The silence in the estate was different now. It was not the tense, holding your breath silence of a house under siege. It was the deep, resonant silence of a cathedral after the last parishioner has left and the doors have been barred against the night. I sat in the wing-back chair in my study watching the dust motes dance in the shaft of afternoon sunlight that pierced the heavy velvet curtains. The house was clean. The physical evidence of the betrayal had been scrubbed away. The shattered glass from the dining room window was replaced. The blood stains on the hardwood floor were sanded down and refinished. Even the smell of gunpowder, which had lingered for weeks in the drapery, was finally gone, replaced by the scent of lemon oil and old paper. But the emptiness remained. It was a vast physical weight. For years this house had been filled with noise. The noise of Sarah's ambitious parties, the noise of Terrence's false laughter, the noise of Tyrell's quiet desperation. Now there was nothing. I was 68 years old, and for the first time in decades, I was truly alone. I looked at the empty chair opposite my desk. It was where Tyrell used to sit when he asked for money. It was where Terrence sat when he pitched his fraudulent charity schemes. I had won. The legal scholars and the pundits on the news channels called it a masterclass in strategy. They called me the Lion of Atlanta. They said I had outmaneuvered a conspiracy that would have killed a younger man. And they were right. I had dismantled my enemies with the precision of a surgeon. Sarah was in a federal penitentiary beginning the first year of her 25-year sentence. Terrence was in a medium security facility undergoing mandatory drug rehabilitation before serving his 15 years. Tyrell was in Seattle, hopefully learning how to boil water and pay an electric bill. I was the victor. But sitting there in the golden light of a Tuesday afternoon, I realized that victory tastes a lot like ash. There is no joy in sending your family to prison. There is no triumph in realizing that the people you broke bread with were waiting for you to die. There is only survival. I had survived. I had protected the legacy. But the house was cold and the halls were too long for one man. I reached for the crystal tumbler on my desk. It was filled with water. I stared at it, thinking of the wine glass that had started it all. The poison chalice. It sat in the evidence locker at the federal courthouse, now a relic of a crime that shattered a dynasty. I took a sip. The water was cool and clean. It tasted like life. I set the glass down. It was time to finish the work. The house was secure, but the legacy was still vulnerable. The Viola Turner Foundation needed a leader. It needed someone who understood that charity was not a tax shelter or a personal piggy bank. It needed a moral compass. I picked up the phone. I dialed a number I had memorized weeks ago. It rang 3 times before she picked up. Hello? Her voice was tentative. She was likely expecting a bill collector or a reporter. The media had hounded her for weeks after her testimony. Jasmine, I said. It is Eldridge Turner. There was a pause. Oh. Hello, Judge Turner. Is everything all right? Do you need me to testify again? No, Jasmine, I said. The trials are over. The verdicts are in. I am calling about the future. The future, she repeated, sounding confused. I need a director for the foundation, I said. I did not lead into it. I did not make small talk. I spoke with the directness of the bench. The position is vacant. The salary is $150,000 a year with full benefits and a seat on the board. I want you to take it. I heard a gasp on the other end of the line. Then a long silence. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. Judge Turner, I don't know what to say. I was just an assistant. I don't have the experience. I don't have the pedigree. You have the only thing that matters, I said firmly. You have integrity. You stood in a room full of sharks and you told the truth. You risked your livelihood to protect the legacy of a woman you never met. That is the qualification, Jasmine. I can hire accountants to handle the math. I can hire lawyers to handle the contracts. I cannot hire a conscience. You are the conscience. But what about the board, she asked. What about the donors? They won't listen to me. They will listen to you, I said, because I will be standing right behind you. You have the keys to the kingdom now. Clean it up, Jasmine. Make it what Viola intended it to be. Help people. Don't build monuments. Build lives. She was crying now, soft sounds of disbelief and gratitude. I won't let you down, Judge. I promise. I know you won't, I said. Come to the house tomorrow at 9. The lawyers will have the papers ready. I hung up. I felt a knot loosen in my chest. The foundation was safe. The money would go to scholarships and food banks, not to Cayman Island shell accounts and gambling debts. I had amputated the rod and grafted on healthy tissue. The patient would survive. I stood up. My shoulders stiffened, the scar tissue pulling tight, but the pain was manageable. It was a reminder, a memento mori. I walked out of the study and through the foyer. I picked up my coat and my hat. I picked up the bottle of 1990 Merlot that had been sitting on the sideboard. It was the twin of the bottle Terrence had used. It was unopened. I walked out the front door and got into my car. I did not call a driver. I drove myself. I drove through the iron gates and down the winding streets of Buckhead. I drove past the country clubs and the churches. I drove until the city fell away, and the green hills of the cemetery rose up to meet me. It was late afternoon. The sun was low, casting long orange shadows across the grass. I parked the car and walked up the hill. I did not need the cane today. My steps were measured and strong. I stopped in front of the white marble headstone. It was simple and elegant, just like she was. Viola Turner, beloved wife, mother, builder. I stood there for a long time, just breathing in the scent of the freshly cut grass and the magnolias. I looked at the name carved in stone. I felt her presence there, warm and reassuring. "Hello, Vi," I said softly. The wind rustled the leaves of the oak tree that shaded her grave. It sounded like a whisper. "I did it," I said. "I cleaned house. It was messy, Vi. It was ugly. You would have hated it. Sarah is gone. Terrence is gone." I paused, looking down at the grass. I had to send Tyrell away. I continued, my voice thick with emotion. I had to break his heart to save his life. "I hope you can forgive me for that." He was drowning, Vi, and I was the anchor. I cut the rope so he could learn to swim. I sent him to Seattle. He is going to paint. He is going to be hungry. But he is going to be a man. I knelt down on the grass. The stone was cool under my hand. "I appointed that girl Jasmine to run the foundation," I said. "She reminds me of you. She is small, but she has steel in her spine. She will do good work. The legacy is safe." I picked up the bottle of wine. I pulled the corkscrew from my pocket and opened it. The pop of the cork was loud in the quiet cemetery. The smell of the rich, dark wine filled the air, oak and berries and thyme. I did not bring a glass. I poured the wine onto the earth at the base of the headstone. The red liquid soaked into the ground, disappearing into the soil that held the woman I loved. "We never got to drink this one," I said, watching the last drops fall. "I was saving it for a special occasion. I suppose this is it. The end of the war." I set the empty bottle down next to the flowers I had sent earlier that week. I stayed there on my knees as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a bruised purple. I felt the weight of the last few months finally lifting. The anger was gone. The fear was gone. There was only peace. I had faced the betrayal of my blood. I had looked down the barrel of a gun. I had exposed the darkness in my own home. And I had prevailed. Not because I was rich, not because I was powerful, but because I was right. I stood up, brushing the grass from my knees. My shoulder ached, but it was a good ache. It was the ache of healing. "Sleep well, my love," I whispered to the stone. "The house is quiet, the books are balanced, and the gavel has fallen." I turned and walked back down the hill. I did not look back. I got into my car and drove home. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I had my memories. I had my dignity. And for the first time in a long time, I had tomorrow. The screen fades to black. The sound of a single heavy gavel strike echoes in the darkness. Bang. Here is the profound lesson learned and the call to action to conclude the story of Eldridge Turner. The story of Eldridge Turner teaches us a brutal but necessary lesson about the true definition of family. We are often raised to believe that blood is thicker than water, that we must endure anything for the sake of our kin. But Eldridge showed us that there is a limit. When loyalty is met with poison and sacrifice is met with greed, the bond of blood becomes a chain that must be broken. The most profound takeaway is not about the legal victory or the financial maneuvering. It is about the courage to set boundaries. Eldridge loved his son enough to break him, realizing that enabling Tyrell's weakness was just as damaging as Sarah's malice. It teaches us that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone fall so they can finally learn how to stand up on their own. True love is not a soft cushion. Sometimes it is a hard wall that forces us to change. Furthermore, this story stands as a testament to the power of observation and preparation. In a world that often dismisses the elderly as obsolete or fragile, Eldridge proved that wisdom and experience are weapons that never dull. He didn't win because he was richer. He won because he was paying attention when everyone else was busy underestimating him. He showed us that silence is not always submission. Often it is a strategy. Ultimately, the last gavel reminds us that dignity is not a gift given by others. It is a fortress we must build and defend ourselves. Peace is not found in a full bank account, but in an empty house where the air is clean of lies. It is better to sit alone in silence with your integrity intact than to feast at a crowded table filled with traitors. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments. Would you have forgiven Tyrell, or would you have kept the door locked forever?